The other day I was grinding Beastmoon Hunt, the monthly event on Wizard101 like I usually do, when one of my friends asked me, what's the best form in the game? That's easy. I've been playing Beastmoon since 2020, hopelessly grinding month after month for all that sweet, sweet Lunari. I got my 1000 wins badge over a year ago. If the game kept track of wins past this badge, I'd probably have over 3000 by now. I hosted the official Beastmoon roundtable with members of the KI team. KingsL even called me a Beastmoon expert. I'm confident I have the experience to answer the simple question. Alright, this is easy. The best form in Beastmoon Hunt is obviously Storm Elf. 2 bonus pips with 2 pip 250 hits? Easy. Wait, Mythrat has the same thing. So Mythrat's the best? Well, if we're talking value per pip, Ice Colossus is a big form with a massive 125 per pip shield and an AoE that trumps most small forms AoE hits. So the answer is Ice Colossus. Or now that I'm thinking about Colossuses, what about Storm Colossus? Stuns, taunts, and big hits? Wait a minute. Why do we even care about the single best form in the game? Teams consist of 6 players, so if I told you right now which form I think is the best, odds are you wouldn't even have a chance to play it. And there's so many outside factors too. Let's say I told you it was Life Drake. We can't just evaluate that in a vacuum. What if the other team is entirely composed of only death forms? What if your Life Drake is only tier 1 and doesn't have access to some of its better cards? What if you don't have it unlocked at all? At this point I was stuck. There's no simple way to figure out which form is the best in the game. The only way to even begin to answer that question would be to compare every single form to all other forms, and that's when I knew what I had to do. Welcome to the Beastmoon tier list. In this video, I'll be ranking every single Beastmoon form on a tier list. If you don't know how a tier list works, it's pretty simple. After evaluating a form, I'll be placing it in a tier. The higher the tier, the better the form is. The lower the tier, the worse the form is. I'll be using a standard ranking that most other tier lists use, starting with S at the top, followed by A, B, C, D, E, and then F at the bottom. Now for some ground rules. When evaluating forms, I'll only be looking at their tier 5 versions. Also, at the time I'm recording this video, Life Croc and Death Elf were just released in spring 2023. So I'll be ranking every single form up until and including these two, meaning if you're watching this video sometime in summer 2023 or later, there's probably going to be some newer forms in the game that I haven't covered in this video, so don't be surprised if they're missing. Maybe I'll make a part 2. Also, I'm only evaluating each form's performance in Beastmoon Hunt, the game's PvP mode, and not Beastmoon Mayhem, the game's PvE mode. And that's because PvP allows for every school's strengths to shine, whereas if you're playing against AI under a timer, you should only use forms with blades and high damage per pip. So if you came here for a Beastmoon Mayhem tier list, it would just look something like this. Here you go. Now, just because I really want to torture myself, not only will I be analyzing all 48 forms, but I'll also be going over every form spell. Each tier 5 form has 10 spells, so if you do the math, I'm about to go over 480 Beastmoon spells in detail. And I'll be assigning each a rating of good, okay, or bad. So in a way, this video is almost like a tier list of tier lists. Oh, and lastly, I'm gonna randomly generate the order I cover each form in, to make it more interesting. And there. Let's begin. Mythdrake got absolutely decimated in KI's summer 2021 balance patch. It used to reign supreme along with Stormwolf as the best form in the entire game, having 2 pip 200s, a minion that constantly generates pips, and easy to pull off stun chains. Trust me, you wouldn't want to challenge a Mythdrake Stormwolf combo back in the day before they were nerfed. It was pretty much a guaranteed loss. However, the massive hit Mythdrake took in summer 2021 wiped it right out of the competitive meta, and now it's hardly chosen at all, especially compared to other Drakes. And that says a lot considering so many early players have it at tier 5. Let's take a look at its spells. Pip Hop's incredibly useful. When in doubt, giving a free pip to yourself or an ally is always a good option. And here's the real kicker. If your ally has a trap, You clear it and get an extra pip yourself. That's 2 pips for the price of 0. Even without the condition, this is an excellent utility spell, so you can imagine how much greater it is with it. Mythic Construct summons, well, a Mythic Construct minion. This minion donates a single pip to a random teammate or itself every round, until it eventually casts a Donate All spell at 4 pips. So basically, it's a pip farmer. If summoned early in the fight, it's extremely useful and can quickly turn the tables to give your team a competitive advantage over the opponents. Its Not a Trap can be pretty useful as well. For the cost of just 1 pip, it pushes a trap to the target and deals 75 damage. In most cases though, you won't have a trap, so it'll just deal 75 damage for 1 pip, which isn't the greatest value considering plenty of other medium-sized forms deal 100 damage per pip. But if your opponent is dumb enough to trap you, you're getting some insane value. Butcher Bat and Sly Mountebank are nearly identical, both costing 2 pips to deal 150 damage with the potential to deal an extra 100 value. Butcher Bat deals an extra 100 damage if you have a shield, and Sly Mountebank throws on an extra 100 trap if the opponent has a shield. They're both pretty average damage spells, not as good as their 2-pip 200 versions prior to Mythdrake's Summer 2021 nerf, but still decent hitting options regardless. Protraction is an afterlife spell that can only be applied to your minion. Once your minion is defeated, it'll deal 150 damage to all enemies. It's important to note that this afterlife will only be triggered if your minion is specifically targeted and defeated. If your minion goes away because you yourself die, this doesn't count as your minion being defeated, and the 150 AoE damage won't be triggered. So for that reason, I'm not really a fan of the spell. Even though the damage per pip is great, your opponent will hardly ever waste a spell to target and kill your minion, so most of the time this spell's useless. If the afterlife was placed on yourself, like Myth Fairies, then the mechanic would be much more effective. Uriel's Wail costs 3 pips to deal 225 damage, and it'll stun if you have your minion out. That's a decent 75 damage per pip, along with a condition that's almost always guaranteed. But stunning at high pip costs is less effective than stunning at low pip costs, so this, along with less damage per pip, is why the pre-nerfed version was so much better than how it is today. I like Pip Broker. For 3 pips, you're basically donating 4 pips to an ally or yourself. Except it's through a double pip aura, so it doesn't happen all at once. But if you're in a slower paced fight, it's very useful. Pip Rally's great. For 4 pips, you're donating 2 pips to everyone on your team, with the chance to clear a trap for even another pip for yourself. If you're in a 3v3 or 4v4, and there's no rush to immediately hit an opponent, Pip Rally is almost always a solid cast, and it pays for itself since you yourself get pips back. Charmed Scales is Mythdrake's big AoE hit. For 5 pips, it sacrifices a minion to deal 300 AoE damage, and if any opponents are shielded, it'll also tack on a 150 trap. That's pretty amazing value per pip, even without the condition. In general, this spell gets used a lot by Mythdrakes if you don't take them out right away, and by the time a Mythdrake has 5 pips to cast it, it's almost guaranteed their minion is out and ready to be sacrificed, so the fact that you need a minion to use it doesn't negatively impact the spell at all. One more thing I want to mention, an insane 7-pip combo used by Mythdrake experts is Protraction right into Charmed Scales. This deals 300 AoE damage, adds a 150 trap to any shielded enemies, then deals 150 AoE afterlife damage. That's a potential 600 AoE damage per opponent. That's the health of an Ice Colossus. So yeah, Charmed Scales is easily Mythdrake's best spell. Overall, with average damage but a unique ability to rapidly generate pips, Mythdrake outcompetes almost every other form in the long run. But that's the problem. Beastmoon's a fast-paced game. The current meta consists of busting out high damage per pip as early as round 1, and that's where Mythdrake falls short. If this was pre-summer 2021 balance patch Mythdrake, easy S tier, but these days, I'd place it in C. Deathwolf's an absolute tank, excelling at weaknesses, taunting, and of course, draining. It's a master at damage control, and although it's not powerful up until tier 5, once it reaches this tier and unlocks its big drain, it truly becomes a force to be reckoned with. Grimbite is extremely useful. It deals 50 damage for 0 pips, and places a 50 weakness if the opponent has over 50% health. This condition is very easy to pull off, especially early on in the fight, so you're basically getting 100 value for 0 pips. For a large form, that's excellent. Haunting Howl works wonders. It's a standard 0 pip taunt, and can be used for follow-up conditions on other spells. But just in general, taunting is a phenomenal way to split incoming damage, especially for tanky forms like Deathwolf. The first of its taunt conditionals, Protect Packmate, only adds to the bulkiness of Deathwolf's repertoire. As if weakening, taunting, and draining didn't make Deathwolf one of the best defensive forms in the game so far, its ability to shield as well only strengthens this more. For 1 pip, you're casting a 75 shield, and if your target is taunted, this value gets doubled. So very often, you'll be following up a taunt with a 1 pip 150 shield on yourself. That's excellent value. My only issue with this spell is that even though you're taunted for 2 rounds, your taunt technically wears off mid-round right before you cast your second spell post-taunt. So you only have that first round post-taunt to activate the taunt condition. Grimjaws is a 1 pip 50 drain. Although this may appear weak at first glance, in reality, you're getting 100 value every time for 1 pip, which for a big form is not bad at all. A Taste of Fear is just a standard 2 pip 150 hit that can clear a blade for a 75 shield on yourself. Pretty average hit. Howl of Horror costs 2 pips to place a 150 weakness on your opponent. It's Deathwolf's second and final taunt conditional spell that can place an additional AoE 50 weakness if you're not taunted. Not a bad way to debuff your opponents. Chilling Growl is one of the spells where Deathwolf falls short. Placing large weaknesses can be risky, because opponents can cast a 0 pip hit to remove them, and this spell is certainly no exception. But if you time it right, you can heavily debuff an incoming AoE hit. That's a very rare scenario though, and the odds you'll successfully pull it off without the opponent seeing it coming are low. Howl of Ill Omen. Wow. If I had an actual tier list for spells, this would easily be S tier. Without the condition, it's simply a 3 pip 225 hit. That's decent enough on its own, but its condition is where it shines. If the opponent has above 50% health, it'll drain instead of just dealing damage. And given you'll always be in need of health since you're taking damage while taunting, and there's almost always going to be an opponent with over 50% HP, this condition is incredibly easy and useful to pull off. By the way, that's 450 value for 3 pips. A literal death fairy drain. And it goes through shields. Damn. Don't get too excited, because its next spell, Steal All Hope, is an instant discard. 4 pips to cast a 150 AoE weakness? You're better off trying to debuff a single target with Chilling Growl for 3 pips than assuming you'll get the full value from an AoE weakness. It steals heal over times too, but that's rarely useful. Lastly, Teeth of Pain costs 5 pips to deal 200 AoE damage. That's pretty underwhelming on its own, but its conditional places a 75 weakness on all opponents that have over 50% health. That's pretty common to pull off, so you're really getting a lot of extra value from the condition of the spell. Also, Deathwolf in general builds pips very easily, since some of its best spells cost 0 pips, so very often you'll passively build 5 pips to cast this. It's a good final gambit before being knocked out. Overall, Deathwolf is one of the tankiest forms in the game, acting as a more defensive form than even some ice forms. Its ability to taunt, drain, shield, and weaken allow it to control damage strategically, all while pulling off nasty combos. Fortunately, its bad spells are outweighed by its amazing ones. And again, it lacks power until tier 5, but we only care about tier 5 in this tier list, so it's an easy A tier for me. Myth Minnow's a very vanilla option. It's a safe bet if you want to deal good damage at 100 value per pip, and it also has the potential to set up a solid defense. But its most favorable quality is low pip cost shield stealing, which makes it an extremely effective ice counter. I always joke that Myth Minnow's a better Fire Minnow than Fire Minnow. Multiply Armor isn't good, and it's a shame because it's one of Myth Minnow's only 0 pip spells. For 0 pips, it pushes a shield from yourself to an ally, and if your ally was already shielded, it'll place an extra 50 shield on yourself. I'm not really sure what the purpose of this spell is, because if you're gonna push a shield from yourself to an ally, you may as well just place the initial shield on the ally and skip this step. I suppose it's okay if your team is AoE shielded and you don't need the one on yourself, but most often I just see Myth Minnows ignore the push and just treat the spell like it's only the condition, and they just target a shielded ally doing nothing to give themselves a 50 shield. So at best, this spell is 50 value for 0 pips, but otherwise, it's pretty useless. Metal Minion's a reliable minion, and the reason Myth Minnow's so good at stalling out opponents. Once summoned, every round it'll cast a 25 shield or 25 mantle on an ally, and at 4 pips, it'll cast a 100 AoE shield. In the short run, its 25 shields and mantles don't really help much at all, but if you can hold your ground and last for a while, this minion will quickly start building up a solid defense for your team. And this minion has a good chunk of health too, so it doesn't die very easily compared to other minions. Rustbat is always an amazing cast, and has the potential to do massive value for just 1 pip. For 1 pip, it steals a shield and deals 100 damage. Let's say your opponent has a 200 shield. That's 500 value for just 1 pip. This spell decimates ice forms, and is the reason you should never go up against a Myth Minnow if you're ice. And even without the condition, 100 damage per pip is solid. Stoke the Flames costs 2 pips to cast an AoE mantle if you have a minion out. To put it lightly, this is an instant discard. You'll never want to use it. Even if it didn't target a minion, it still wouldn't be great. You have much better options at 2 pips. Speaking of much better options, Let a Rip is a classic 2 pip 200, and I'll let the value speak for itself. Just like all the other forms 2 pip 200s you'll later see in this video, it's always a phenomenal hit to bust out on round 1. Borrowed Time casts a 150 shield for 2 pips, and can clear a trap for an extra 100 shield on yourself. It's not often your opponent will leave a trap on you for long, so this condition doesn't pop off frequently. So more often than not, you're only getting 150 value for 2 pips. 75 shield per pip is alright, but nothing special. Lingering Wail is just as average as Borrowed Time. Again, 75 value per pip with a condition that doesn't pull off frequently. For 3 pips, you're dealing 225 damage with the potential to add a mantle if the opponent has a damage over time. At least this spell's a hit though. I like Cast Iron Aegis. It's always been a reliable spell in Myth Minnow's deck. For 3 pips, you're casting a 200 AoE shield as long as your team has a minion out. Sometimes I like minioning on round 1 right into one of these. It's a solid combo that can build a strong defense up front, as long as you're not up against glass cannons. Grasping Gillen is almost always an instant discard. 4 pips for just 100 AoE damage? I mean, it steals a shield from each opponent before dealing the damage, but how often will all your opponents be shielded? Lastly, Cursed Medusa isn't much better, so if you're looking for good AoE hits, Myth Minnow just isn't your form. For 6 pips, you deal 200 AoE damage, then clear a shield for a stun. So again, this is just a low damage AoE hit with a shield based condition, and as Myth Minnow you'll hardly ever be at 6 pips, unless someone donates you some. Also, I don't like how its damage comes before the shield clear. You're just hitting into their shields. Overall, even though it has many terrible spells, these definitely get outweighed by its minion, bat, gobbler, and AoE shield. In fact, you could just forget about all its other spells, and pretend it only has these 4. I like that Myth Minnow could be effective in the short run with high damage per pip, and also the long run with its defensive buildup. I've seen Myth Minnows stall out Ice Colossuses by setting up their minion and shielding up, then rustbatting and gobblering a bunch of times for the kill. With that said, its biggest drawback besides having a bunch of instant discard spells is its inability to build pips. By this I mean it has pretty much no options for 0-pip spellcasts. Multiply Armor often does literally nothing, and you shouldn't cast a minion more than once, or it'll replace it. With all this considered, I'd place Myth Minnows safely inside B tier. Stormwolf's always been a prominent form, very high in popularity. To me, he's like the main character of Beastmoon Hunt, especially since he was one of the original forms introduced during the game mode's release. But that doesn't mean he was clear of any controversy. Upon release, he was an absolute powerhouse. As a large form with easy stun chains and 2-pip 200s, nothing stood a chance. Every player tiered their Stormwolf up, and it was rare you'd find a competitive team without one. He continued to reign supreme as the king of Beastmoon all the way until KI's Spring 2022 balance patch, where his damage per pip was nerfed from 100 to 75. He's still good, but not completely broken like before. Let's check out his spells. Catalyze is just your standard 0-pip 50 blade. It's just like the treasure card you can get from a Beastmoon chest, except it also removes a damage over time, which is a nice condition. Turbocharge is another one of Stormwolf's blades. It's a 100 blade that costs 1 pip, which isn't bad, but unlike the previous spell, this one has a much worse condition. If the player you cast this blade on has a heal over time, it'll also throw on a 50 shield. Heal over times are not common in a fast-paced game like Beastmoon, especially since they can't revive you, so it's rare you'll have one to pull this condition off. And even if you do, the reward isn't that great. Thunder Gaze may be the single most controversial spell of the entire game, because of how broken it was pre-nerf. Before the Spring 2022 balance patch, Thunder Gaze dealt 50 damage and stunned your target for only 1 pip, allowing you to annihilate your opponent in a nasty stun chain. Back then, you could hold up to 5 owls in your deck too, meaning if you discard strategically, you could stun 5 turns in a row, dealing a massive 250 damage in total. And if your opponent was fire, consider them dead already, because 5 owls in a row would deal a massive 375 damage. In Spring 2022, the devs sliced this spell's damage in half and reduced the total amount you could hold from 5 to 4, meaning it's no longer as game-breaking as it once was before, but it's still a great way to stunlock your opponent while using any blades you might have casted on yourself. Feeding Frenzy used to be an instant discard before it was buffed in Spring 2022. At the time, it cost 2 pips to deal 100 damage and gave 1 pip back if your opponent was trapped. That's a measly 50 damage per pip with an infrequent condition that certainly doesn't make the spell any more worth using. However, this condition was buffed to give back 2 pips now, meaning you'd basically be dealing 100 damage for 0 pips. That's a pretty great condition, but again, your opponent will rarely be trapped for you to even pull it off, so for me, it's still an instant discard. Storm Surge was the only 100 damage per pip spell untouched during Stormwolf's nerfs. To this day, it still casts a 200 blade for 2 pips, and throws on an extra 100 blade if your ally already has a blade or weakness. Even though it's not direct damage, it's still basically a 2-pip 200, which for a big form is legendary. Both the condition's frequency and value are excellent. You can easily pull off a nasty combo by casting a small blade into a Storm Surge for tons of blade value, then spamming owls for high damage stun chaining. Tempest Tiburon used to be a 2-pip 200, making Stormwolf one of the only large forms with a 2-pip 200 hit in its arsenal. But since this was too overpowered, the devs ended up cutting its damage down to 150, which is still pretty decent. I'm glad the devs no longer allow large forms to bust out 200 damage on round 1 anymore. But yeah, this spell went from grossly overpowered to mediocre. If you thought Tempest Tiburon was overpowered pre-nerf, take a look at Voltaic Phoenix. Before Spring 2022, it dealt 300 damage for 3 pips, with the chance of dealing 400 damage if you have a heal over time. This spell was one of the highest damage single-hitting spells in the game. It could literally one-hit KO a Fire Elf on just round 2, even without the condition. So for a large form like Stormwolf, this was plain unfair. Just like they'd done with the other spells, KI brought this card's value down from 100 damage per pip to 75, meaning it now only deals 225 damage, or 300 with the condition. Unfortunately, this condition simply isn't reliable enough to count on, so this spell's just okay now. Sheet Lightning's a cheap 3-pip 100 AoE hit that can clear a damage over time from each player on your team. It's a solid fire counter, and an easy way to multiply blade value on all enemies since it's an AoE, but without a blade, its damage is simply just too low. Avenging Marid pre-nerf dealt 200 AoE damage for 4 pips, with the chance of dealing 325 damage if you had a damage over time on yourself. Again, for a large form, this damage was astronomical, so following the theme of other nerfs, KI brought these values down to 150 and 250, so the spell's no longer broken, but still a decent option if you're bladed. Lastly, Sea King's Thunder deals 225 AoE damage and stuns all enemies for a hefty 6 pips. This spell was actually slightly buffed from an original 200 AoE damage, but the value's still low for the pip cost, and trust me, you'll rarely ever have 6 pips to cast it as a Stormwolf. Overall, Stormwolf used to wipe out everything in its path, even outmatching some ice forms, before KI nerfed its damage per pip from 100 to 75. If you ask around the community, you'll see long-term players saying it's bad now, just because they're comparing it to how broken it used to be. But if you take an unbiased look, it's still an incredible form, with 2 pip 200 blades that you can cast on round 1, and the ability to stunlock while simultaneously using up blades, Stormwolf still stands as a bulky powerhouse that's useful in almost any situation. I'd throw him in A tier. Talk about a consistent form. Life Drake's the king of 150s. With many options to deal 150 damage or heal 150 HP, you can bet Life Drake's gonna do 150 something almost every turn. It's one of the weird cases where a medium form has 2 bonus pips, except unlike Ice Croc, Life Drake tends to stick to lower pip cost spells and ends up accumulating more pips than it needs. But that's okay, because it really only relies on its low cost spells. Except Charming Pixie, a classic 75 heal over time for 0 pips, just like the treasure card. Since heal over times can't revive, and you never really need to build pips by using 0 pip spells, this is almost always an instant discard if pulled early on in a fight. But Resuscitate's the polar opposite. 150 health for 0 pips? And it can be placed prematurely as an afterlife so you can guarantee an immediate revival? It may seem too good to be true, but oh, it's true. This spell is the highest numerical value 0 pip spell in the game, and it's given to a medium-sized form. You could even hold 3 in your deck at tier 5. I thought for sure back in the day this would get nerfed, at least to 100 health, but it never has been, so enjoy it while it lasts. Oh, and you'll most likely always want to cast this on yourself because as Life Drake, the enemies usually target you first. But yeah, this spell has no reason being this great. Always stock up on as many battle cards of this as you can. For 1 pip, Sickly Moth deals 75 damage and pushes a damage over time to the enemy. It's a good way to get in some damage with a pretty useful condition. Although lots of Life Drake players instantly discard Feisty Sprite due to it being a heal over time, it actually has some insane value. For only 2 pips, you're casting a 300 heal over time, and if you're using this on someone with a blade, you'll also throw on a 100 shield. That's 400 value for just 2 pips. And the condition's very easy to pull off, since Life Drake very frequently casts blades, which you'll see shortly. But even though its value is out of this world, Feisty Sprite just doesn't stand up to Life Drake's other healing options. Stinging Scarab deals 150 damage for 2 pips, with the ability to tack on an extra 200 damage over time if your target already has a damage over time. So you'll commonly see Life Drakes push a damage over time with Caterpillar right into Scarab for maximum value. This, along with the fact that blades double once affecting your initial damage and again affecting your conditional damage, gives this spell the potential to deal tremendous damage. Divine Spark is fantastic. It's a runner-up as Life Drake's second most useful spell, right behind its Afterlife. For 2 pips, you're healing for 150 and giving a 50 blade. That's 200 value for 2 pips, and a pretty solid revival. Nothing bad to say about this spell. Harvest Spirit's phenomenal. Even though it only deals 150 damage for 3 pips, it also places an Afterlife on your opponent. So once your opponent dies, it grants a 100 blade to everyone on your team. Plus, Since Life Drake starts with 3 pips, you can bust this out on round 1. So if you knock out an opponent, your whole team gets 100 blades as early as round 2. The Pips Fairy, or Pips of Fairy, according to Mayhem's menu chat options. For 4 pips, this spell heals your whole team 150 HP, and gives a pip to anyone who's bladed. The value's not bad, but Life Drake really only needs to stick to single heals. It's not often you'll be the last player standing and need to heal your whole team, since opponents are usually going to take you out first, so you won't see this casted very often. Willow's Wheel is only useful in extremely specific scenarios. For 4 pips, it removes every single damage over time from your entire team, and gives every player a 150 heal over time. So if your team is flooded with tons of damage over times, this spell could come in clutch, but that's only once in a blue moon. Lastly, Fang Spider deals 200 AoE damage for 5 pips, and could potentially place an extra 150 AoE damage over time on any opponent that already has a damage over time. So it's basically the AoE version of your Scarab, but as an AoE, it's harder to pull off your condition. You should always discard this. Overall, Life Drake gets taken out quick, so you usually only have a few rounds of action. You'll want to Afterlife and heal spam yourself as much as possible to keep yourself alive. And trust me, this works wonders. The fact that you start a fight with 3 pips is insane, enabling you to spam 2 pip heals from the get-go. And don't even get me started up again on the Afterlife. It's completely broken. No idea why KI made the value so ridiculously high for 0 pips. The only thing holding Life Drake back is its inability to deal high amounts of damage. But that shouldn't matter since your allies can do the heavy hitting as you keep everyone alive. Congrats to Life Drake on being our first S tier. Before Storm forms got a small HP buff in summer 2021, Stormrat was infamous for being the lowest health form in the entire game, with a measly 300 HP. I mean, it's not much better now, but don't let its low health fool you. Stormrat's stun chaining abilities are unparalleled. No other beast form can keep an opponent rendered completely useless for as long as Stormrat can. By the way, when I say stun chaining, I'm including dispels too. Let's check out its spells. I normally say a spell like Negative Charge, which casts a 0 pip 75 infection, should be an instant discard, but 3 of Stormrat's other spells can use it as a condition. So if you can afford to burn around, then casting just one of these on your target before follow-up conditionals could work in your favor. But that's only for slower paced fights. More often than not, you'll die so quickly that you're better off using something better. Jolting Bolt deals a solid 100 damage for 0 pips. Great value on a direct hit. A much better option than Negative Charge for building pips. Omnigation Stormrat's signature move, and it's what makes Stormrat so threatening. It's a 1 pip dispel. No other form in the game has such a cheap dispel. If you play this right, you can make your opponent burn tons of pips and keep them locked in a toxic dispel chain. You'll definitely want to stock up on battle cards for this. Decelerate's a 1 pip stun that places a 50 weakness if your target already has a weakness, so it's not a bad follow-up from Negative Charge, but more importantly, it's a second 1 pip option for stun chaining your opponent. Between this and Omnigation, you have more rounds of stun chaining than any form in the game. Thunderbug deals 125 damage for 1 pip, but it can do 50 more damage if the target's weakened. This condition is pretty easy to pull off, so you're often getting a ton of value for a single pip. Blitzbeast is Stormrat's 2 pip 200, and it can give you a pip back if you have a heal over time. You'll most likely never pull that condition off, but regardless, a 2 pip 200 is always fantastic. Cyclonic Swarm costs 3 pips to deal 250 damage with a guaranteed stun. 3 pips is a great deal for all that value and utility, and you can always follow this up with more stuns and dispels for a nasty stun chain. Redirect Current is one of Stormrat's worst spells, which says a lot about the form because it's still pretty good. It's a 3 pip AoE blade that clears dots, a pretty common trend among Storm forms. It's just that with dispels and 2 pip 200s at your disposal, you have much better options at cheaper pip costs. Snapcracken Pip is the AoE version of Blitzbeast. For 4 pips it deals 200 AoE damage and can give 2 pips back if you have a heal over time. Again, a pretty rare condition, but if you can actually pull this off, that's basically a 2-pip 200 AoE, which is insane. Vigilant Titan is the AoE version of Thunderbug, 250 AoE damage for 5 pips, and an extra 100 damage if the target's weakened or dispelled. This condition is a lot easier to pull off than Snapcrack and pips, but the fact that this spell costs so many pips makes it a lot less useful for a form like Stormrat that dies so quickly, and most likely won't have an opportunity to use it. Overall, Stormrat's small but deadly. Even though it has pretty solid damage per pip, its main niche in Beastmoon is to lock opponents in excruciating stun and dispel chains. If you're ever unlucky enough to end up in a 1v2 against a Stormrat, consider the fight already lost, because it won't let you get a single turn in while its teammate chips away and kills you. I'd almost place Stormrat in S tier as one of the greatest forms in the game, but comparing it to other offensive small forms, the fact that it only has 1 bonus pip and 200 damage on its 2-pip hit knocks it down to A tier. Storm Pig, or Life Pig as I jokingly call it, is an amazing beast form with the ability to bust out great damage and even revive fallen teammates. It's the only form in the game with spells that are affected by complete randomness, so if you don't like relying on RNG, then you probably won't enjoy playing it. But for me, randomness only makes the form more interesting. Let's take a look at its spells. Wild Tremble is a basic 0-pip 50 weakness, just like from a Beastmoon chest. It's pretty okay on its own, but just as we saw from Stormrat, this weakness allows for plenty of follow-up conditions on other spells, making it a pretty solid option for setting up combos. Speaking of combos, Wild Serpent costs 0 pips to deal 50 damage, and it'll place a 75 blade on yourself if your opponent has a weakness. You'll pull this condition off often, getting 125 value for 0 pips, so it's pretty good. Wild Maelstrom is a very unique spell. For 1 pip, you randomly cast one of 3 possible negative charms. Either Dispel, which is amazing, a 75 Weakness, which is decent, or a 75 Infection, which is horrible. So it's a very balanced yet completely unpredictable spell that I tend to discard often, but keep in mind that any of these outcomes will always combo into other spell conditions, so I tend to cast this for that purpose alone, instead of pretending it's a Dispel and getting disappointed. Don't forget that against life forms, the infection is actually very useful, so this spell is always an excellent spell to cast. Wild Zeal casts a 125 blade for 1 pip, and removes a damage over time. This is amazing value for a medium-sized form, and also counters fire forms very well. Wings of the Wild deals 100 damage for 1 pip, and clears a heal over time for a stun. Solid value with a pretty neat condition even though it's hard to pull off. I love Wild Hearts. It's the reason Storm Pig is such a unique and sneaky form. For 2 pips, you heal a direct 50 HP, and then randomly throw on either a 100, 150, or 200 heal over time. This makes Storm Pig one of the only non-life forms that can revive. Best case scenario, you're reviving a teammate for 250 health, which is disgustingly good. And worst case scenario, you're still reviving your teammate anyway, which will distract your opponents and hopefully allow your teammate to get a good round in. Storm Pig wouldn't be the same without this spell. Wildcat's a 2-pip 200 that combos well with a weakness. If the target's weakened, it'll also place a 75 weakness on top. I personally prefer Wild Serpent's conditional blade over a stacked weakness, but it's still pretty useful in most cases. Just like all other forms 2-pip 200s, you'll always want to cast this on round 1 to quickly take out your opponent. Ursa Wild's really cool. For 3 pips you deal 200 damage and heal yourself 50. I've actually survived certain difficult situations because of the heal from the spell, and you'll most likely not be at full health by the time you use it, so you're getting the full value every time. Wild Jinn is an AoE version of Wildcat, dealing 200 AoE damage for 4 pips, and adding an extra 75 weakness to any already weakened opponents. It's an incredibly useful AoE that could come in clutch if your opponents don't kill you quick enough, but often you'll just want to stick to your 2-pip 200s. Wild Squall is the AoE version of Wings of the Wild, dealing 250 AoE damage for 5 pips, clearing any heal over times for a stun. The value isn't bad, and you do only have one of these in your deck, but you'll still want to instantly discard it, because you'll never have 5 pips to use it with better, cheaper options as Stormpig. Overall, Stormpig plays a strong offense with the sneaky ability to resurrect downed teammates. In fact, a lot of players don't even know Stormpig can heal, so they'll be in for a rude awakening if they don't target you first. But yeah, if you bust out your 2-pip 200 on round 1 and then follow up with weaknesses and heals, you'll destroy your opponents with ease. I'm throwing it in A tier. We've covered a lot of great forms so far, but here's where we start to dive into underwhelming at best territory. Ice Minnow's the first form I'm covering that's simply not good, and for many reasons you'll see when we cover its spells. But pretty much anything it does, other forms can do better, and a lot better. It's pretty much an off-brand Ice Croc, with worse shields, fewer bonus pips, worse conditions, and difficulty building pips. Let's check out its spells. Chill Bug costs 0 pips to deal 50 damage and clears a blade for a 50 weakness. This condition is good for greatly reducing incoming damage, but sadly, this is Ice Minnow's only 0 pip spell, meaning there aren't any other options for building pips. Winter's Ward casts a 100 shield for 1 pip and removes a weakness. 100 value for 1 pip normally is pretty good, but as far as shield value goes, relative to other ice form shields, it's pretty low. But at least Winter's Ward isn't as bad as Bracing Breeze, a small 1-pip 75 shield and 2-round stun block aura. As of right now, Bracing Breeze is the worst shield in the entire game. Stun block aura isn't nearly as good as actual permanent stun blocks, because, well, wouldn't you rather have 1 guaranteed stun protection for the entire fight instead of a 2-round window to block stuns? Sure, if you're being bombarded by stuns, then it's worth it to have the aura, but that's extremely unlikely. More often than not, this aura will just block 1 stun, if any, and at that point, having a permanent stun block would be much better. Sultan of Sleet is a 2-pip 150 hit that'll taunt you for 2 rounds if your team has a minion up. Taunting is great as a medium-sized form, but you'll rarely pull this condition off. Ice Lash is literally just a 2-pip 150 hit without any condition. Not good, but not bad. Freeze the Heart is Ice Minnow's third 2-pip 150 hit that clears a blade for a stun. Of all 3 2-pip 150s, this is the best one because of the condition, but still nothing too special. Bitter Chill's a 3-pip 225 hit that throws a 125 shield on yourself if the opponent's trapped. Not an easy condition to pull off, but when you do, it's a lot of value. Winter's Fury is a 3-pip 225 trap that clears a weakness on yourself for 75 damage. I love this condition because if your opponent tries to hinder your damage by weakening you, you can completely counteract this by clearing the weakness and dealing 300 straight damage. And weaknesses get thrown around often in Beastmoon. Bracing Wind is god-awful. For 4 pips, which is hard enough to come by as Ice Minnow, you're casting a puny 100 shield and 2-round stun block aura on everyone on your team. That's horrendous value. Make sure you discard this every single time. Only once in a blue moon, you'll have 5 pips to cast Cold Harvest. See what I did there? But when you do, expect an underwhelming 200 AoE damage, clearing any blades for 75 weaknesses. Again, you'll just want to discard these higher pip spells as Ice Minnow, since 1, you'll never be able to build pips for them, and 2, their value just stinks. Overall, Ice Minnow's just a bland, weak form. Most of the time you're better off not casting shields and just alternating between 50 and 150 hits. As you'll later see in this video, Ice Croc puts Ice Minnow in its place. In fact, all ices outperform it. But to be fair, it still has a good chunk of health, and can guarantee a 150 hit every time it's at 2 pips. Let's throw it an E tier. Myth Colossus is an absolute monster of a form, with a minion strategy unlike any other myth form in the game. I jokingly call it the final boss of Beastmoon because if left unattended, it can set up 2 minions that'll all simultaneously annihilate you. Let's check out its spells. Starting from the top, Fierce Rally is a pretty forgettable spell, pushing a shield to an ally for 0 pips, and giving yourself an extra 75 shield if you're taunted. The value of this conditional 75 shield isn't bad, but it takes some time to set up your taunt to pull it off. Most of the time, you'll want to discard this. Here's where things get interesting. Brazen Strike deals 50 damage and summons a combat engine minion. But if you already have a combat engine minion out, it'll deal 50 damage and taunt you instead. So right away, you'll notice this fixes an ongoing issue most myth forms experience regarding their minion spell becoming useless after using it one time. For all other myth forms, once you cast your minion, that spell becomes dead weight since casting another one will just replace and reset it. So the spell card just clutters your deck. But Myth Colossus solves that problem by not only allowing you to use that spell again without replacing your minion, but getting a really amazing condition from it. Taunting as a large form is phenomenal. I've barely scratched the surface of this spell though, because now we need to take a look at the combat engine minion itself. At 100 health, it outperforms every other myth form's minion so far in the game, with 4 amazing spells. For 0 pips, it either 50 traps, 50 shields, or spawns an egg bomb minion if one isn't out already, which I'll go over shortly. Then at 4 pips, it either casts an AoE 150 shield or AoE 150 trap. This value is legendary for a minion. Trust me, it adds up real quick. But stay with me here. Here's where it gets insane. As soon as the combat engine minion casts an egg bomb minion, the egg begins passing and saving pips. Once it hits 3 pips, it blasts the enemies with a sacrificial 200 AoE hit. So if you ever see an egg bomb minion spawn on the enemy side, kill it immediately, because it won't die on its own. Even if you kill the Myth Colossus, the egg will stay up. So if you don't specifically target and kill it, you'll get absolutely swept by its 200 AoE hit on its 3rd round of being alive. Absolute insanity. It's worth noting that the Egg Bomb minion's health very recently was nerfed from 200 to 50, but it's still grossly overpowered. Grim Gambit's a 1-pip 100 trap that taunts if you're shielded. Great value for a large form. Ray's Banner costs 1 pip to cast a double pip aura on your minion for 3 rounds, so it basically costs 1 pip to donate 3. Envelop is a 2-pip 200 trap that puts a 100 shield on yourself if the enemy's taunted. The fact that Myth Colossus has a 2-pip 200 is unbelievable. Heavy Charge casts a 250 damage over time for just 2 pips and it steals a shield. Amazing utility and great value. To the Last is a 3-pip Afterlife you cast on an ally, so once they die, it puts up a 200 AoE shield. Not bad at all. Hold Fast is a 3-pip 150 AoE trap, and if you're taunted, it'll be a 3-pip 200 AoE trap. This condition is very easy to pull off, so often you're basically casting a Death Rat's 200 AoE trap. Amazing. Total War is a 4-pip 150 AoE hit that tacks on an extra 150 AoE damage over time if your team has a minion up. Another super easy condition to pull off that grants you a lot of extra value. Flank Sweep is a big 5-pip 300 AoE damage over time that steals a shield from all enemies. Definitely a solid spell with, again, a solid condition. As you can see, Myth Colossus is an absolute menace with incredibly high value spells, extremely easy to pull off conditions, and 2 deadly minions that wipe the floor with you. In a 2v2, this would be S tier, since you could set up your minions as soon as possible. But unfortunately, Myth Colossus can't optimize its minion strategy in a 3v3 and 4v4, since there simply isn't enough space for both minions out together. So overall, I'd place Myth Colossus in A tier. Death Fairy's got some amazing drains that keep it alive and thriving if not taken out immediately. The only thing holding it back is its low health, just like all other small forms. Let's check out its spells. Oof, Infection is awful. 0 pips for a 75 infection. Discard it every time. Pilfer Health, on the other hand, is fantastic. 0 pips for a 50 drain. That's 100 value for 0 pips if you get the full heal value, and it's a great way to passively build pips while staying alive. Incredible. Cursed Kitty deals a heavy 125 damage for 1 pip, and places a 75 trap if you're bladed. You'll be bladed very often because of the spell I'm about to cover next, so you're getting 200 value pretty often. Mischievous Spirit slaps a 1 pip 125 trap on your opponent, and steals a blade. I'm a big fan of this spell. Foul Nectar is a 1 pip 200 damage over time. Not bad, but you have plenty of better options as Death Fairy, so you'll usually want to discard this. Horrid Homunculus costs 2 pips and shreds apart life forms, dealing 300 damage over time and clearing a heal over time for a detonate. So if your opponent has a heal over time, this spell basically clears it for a whopping 300 damage. Consume Life is out of this world, casting a 3 pip 225 drain on your opponent. This is 450 value for just 3 pips. As Death Fairy, you'll almost always want to cast this on round 1 to keep yourself alive while dealing massive damage to your opponent. Stock up on battle cards for this, trust me. Hasten Death is an instant discard. It costs 3 pips to hurt yourself, dealing a self 75 damage over time, then places a 4-round double pip aura on your ally. Not good. Grasping Ghost is the AoE version of Mischievous Spirit, costing 4 pips to place an AoE 125 trap and steals a blade from each enemy. Unless all your opponents are bladed up, don't use this. Death's Champion is the AoE version of Cursed Kitty, dealing a 5 pip 300 AoE damage over time. And if you're bladed, it'll also place an AoE 150 trap. Honestly, it's not too bad, but you have a lot of better options. Overall, Death Fairy's a one-trick pony, just like a lot of other small forms. Basically, you'll want a 225 drain on round 1, then keep 50 draining until you can 225 drain again. It's a pretty effective strategy that can outlast even the strongest opponents. A tier for sure. Life Fairy's honestly not that bad. It gets a bad rep because of how easily it gets taken out, and how other fairies outshine it, but it can still put out decent damage, and of course has tons of excellent heals. Let's check out its spells. Seedling is a 0 pip heal over time push, which isn't useful at all, and then puts a 100 heal over time on yourself, which is awful value. You're just getting 25 health around, and you'll die so fast as Life Fairy that it won't make a difference at all. Ballistic Bat's a 0 pip 50 hit. Not great value, especially for a small form like Life Fairy, but hey, it beats Seedling. Revenant is a 1 pip afterlife that triggers a 2-round double pip aura for everyone on your team. It's honestly not that bad, but I still prefer afterlives that heal. Spiteful Sprite costs 1 pip to place a 200 heal over time along with a small 50 blade. It's a great way to combo and to follow up blade conditionals, and altogether, 250 value for 1 pip isn't terrible. But it's still a heal over time, which in general isn't very useful at all, especially when you die so quickly. Clever Imp deals 100 damage for 1 pip, and clears a shield for a 100 heal over time. If the clear effect happened before the 100 damage, this spell would be much better, but unfortunately it doesn't. Dryad of Artemis is the best heal in the game, and the first X-Pip spell I'm covering in this video. It heals 100 HP per pip, which is honestly pretty great value, considering healing is such a valuable utility. You'll most often only cast this at 1 or 2 pips, but it's cool to know that you have access to a 7 pip 700 heal if needed. Divine Intervention is a 2 pip 200 heal that casts an additional 100 blade if your ally is bladed already. As I mentioned earlier, it's an excellent follow-up to Spiteful Sprite's blade, giving you 300 value for 2 pips, and even without the condition, it can be used as an amazing revive. Angelic Vigor unleashes 200 damage on your opponent for 3 pips, along with a 3-round double pip aura if you're bladed. This means if you pull that condition off, you're basically getting all your pips back, effectively casting 200 damage for 0 pips. And you could pull this off on round 1. Any first round 200 hit is an excellent spell. Planestalker is a 3-pip 225 hit with a weird condition. If the target is a minion, it'll put an afterlife that deals 100 AoE damage over time when the minion dies. This is a top contender for worst condition in the entire game. You're never gonna waste 3 pips to kill a minion, and even if you do, 100 damage over 4 rounds is awful. You're way better off targeting a real player with this instead. Condition aside, this is a great hit that again, you can bust out on round 1. Awesome. Fiddleback deals a measly 150 AoE damage for 6 pips, but also tacks on a 200 AoE damage over time. So it's really 350 damage for 6 pips, which is a little better, but the real kicker is that blades count as double value on the spell, affecting both the initial 150 and again on the 200 over time damage. But none of what I'm saying even matters, because let's be real, you'll never reach 6 pips as Life Fairy, so just discard this. Of all the forms, Life Fairy probably gets the least playing time on the battlefield, dying immediately almost every single fight. Your opponents will have a bounty on you, but if you're able to somehow survive past round 1, then you could start healing for big HP. And hey, at least you do have 2 strong hitting options to bust out on round 1, which honestly brings Life Fairy from somewhere between D and E tier up to a solid C tier. Balance Rat's a wacky form, which has some pretty cool utility. It has a weird ability to rapidly gain pips that most players don't even realize, and a crazy pip building chain stunning combo, but unfortunately it falls short on its offense, and as a small form, that's especially not a good thing. Let's check out its spells. We start off strong with Scorpion Venom, a 0-pip 50 hit that stuns if the opponent either has a blade or weakness. Keep in mind, when I say weakness in this video, I really mean any negative charm, including infections, which is exactly the case for this spell. As you'll see shortly, Balance Rat can cast infections with ease, that most opponents won't have any heals to remove. This means you can basically cast a permanent infection on the opponent round 1 and follow up with a ton of chain stunning Scorpion hits for 0 pips each, allowing you to deal decent damage and build pips while your opponent is rendered completely useless. It's a slept-on strategy that's insanely useful in most situations. Fair Trade costs 0 pips to deal 0 damage, then swaps any charm with an opponent. I personally like Balance Wolf Scarab better, since it could swap away a weakness before dealing damage, but Balance Rat Scarab can still be useful. Sleight of Hand swaps any charm with an ally, then donates a pip. Most often, this is just a pip for a pip, which isn't anything remarkably special. I love Turn the Tables. It costs 1 pip to place a protected 100 weakness on the opponent, and a protected 50 blade on yourself. I'll take 150 value for 1 pip any day. Crippling Blow is a 2-pip 150 hit that casts an additional 100 weakness if a minion exists on either side. As a small form, waiting for a minion to be casted to pull off your condition isn't ideal, since you'll most likely die beforehand. So often, this is just a 2-pip 150 hit. Wounding Strike is a same animation, same value 2-pip 150 hit, but with a better side effect. Instead of a condition, it just slaps on a 50 infection, which normally isn't useful, but as I mentioned earlier, it combos extremely well into Scorpion Venom stun chaining. Heist Prep donates 3 pips for 3 pips. That by itself is pretty good, and it also clears any charm for an Empowerment aura that gives 2 pips back for every incoming rank 2 and up spell. Meaning if you blade yourself round 1 with Turn the Tables, then cast this on yourself round 2, you first get all 3 pips back from the initial donation, then you immediately get an additional 2 pips back from the aura since it's a self-casted rank 3 and up spell. This means by round 3, you can 6-pip AoE with a 50 blade. Insane. And pretty confusing, I know. But all you have to know is that this spell is very good. Lie in Wait casts an Empowerment aura that gives 1 pip for every incoming rank 1 and up spell. This also gives you a pip back immediately after casting, since it counts as an incoming rank 3 spell. But keep in mind, this spell doesn't include the initial 3 pip donation that Heist Prep comes with, so it's a lot worse. Blind Strike is a 4 pip AoE spell that puts a protected 100 blade on everyone on your team, and a protected 100 weakness on all your opponents. Even though there's no direct damage in this spell, I find the utility extremely useful. Spider Sovereign is Balance Rat's highest pip cost spell, dealing 225 AoE damage for a whopping 6 pips. Even though it's not hard to pull off since you generate so many pips, the value just isn't up to par for a small form. I'd usually recommend discarding it, but it comes in handy with that heist prep strategy I mentioned earlier. Overall, Balance Rat is jam-packed with unique utilities, like incredible chain stunning and weird ways to generate pips. But again, it can't hit very hard as a small form, so I'd place it right in D tier. Where do I begin? There's a reason players have been anxiously waiting for what feels like an eternity since Ice Colossus has last been made available to unlock. It's constantly being gatekept behind extremely infrequent releases, and that's a shame for players who don't have it yet, because Ice Colossus is an absolute tank. An immovable wall with the strongest defense in the entire game, and an equally impressive offense. I'll let the spells speak for themselves. Eternal Aegis, 125 shield per pip, on a large form. That's insane. This is something that would be overpowered even from a small form. The fact that you can easily build up pips by shielding every round with 0 pip shields, then drop a massive 7 pip 875 bomb is game breaking, and will often literally leave your opponent without enough hits to break through it and kill you. So as long as you have enough hits yourself, dropping a massive 875 shield, then chipping away at your opponent is a guaranteed win, unless they can clear it. Also, it's worth noting that this is the highest value X pip spell in Beastmoon, as the 2 others are only 100 value per pip. Scrap Trap is the first of Ice Colossus's 0 pip 100 shields, plus it removes a trap. It's the perfect way to build pips as you keep your teammate alive. Shielded Beetle is a 0 pip 50 hit that clears a blade for a hefty 100 shield on yourself. That's a pretty solid condition. Aegis of Artemis is Ice Colossus's second 0 pip 100 shield, and it throws on a stun block as well. Stuns are very prevalent in Beastmoon, so the additional stun block only adds to the already amazing value of this spell. As if Ice Colossus didn't already seem busted enough with its incredibly strong shielding ability, it also gets a dirty 125 damage hit for 1 pip. That's Mithrad's Storm Elf value. Well, Sleet Snake actually is a 50 hit, but if you're shielded or trapped, which is almost always the case, it'll deal a whopping 125 damage. Armory of Artemis is ridiculous. 3 pips for an AoE 200 shield. You should always bust this out if it's in your hand, because it'll guarantee your teammates stay alive an extra round. That's insane value for a large form like Ice Colossus. Snow Swarm is Ice Colossus's first mediocre spell, dealing 150 damage for 3 pips. It'll also throw on a 125 trap if the opponent's already trapped. I almost always discard this spell because you're way better off dealing 125 damage for a 1 pip Sleet Snake than wasting 3 pips on this. Blue Moon Bird deals 200 damage for 4 pips, which isn't good, but it will clear a blade for 2 pips back. Meaning if you cast this on a bladed opponent, it's basically a 2 pip 200. That's an amazing condition, but unfortunately, it's not the easiest to pull off. Iceheart Kraken is an instant discard. I don't even want to talk about it, but yeah, it's a 6 pip 150 AoE hit that places a 200 trap on any trapped opponents. Awful. I bet you're wondering, why did I say at the beginning of this section that Ice Colossus has equally impressive offense as its defense, if the only strong hit so far was Sleet Snake? Well, that's because you haven't yet witnessed the sheer force of Cold-Fired Phoenix. This spell does astronomical damage. It one-shots most small forms with ease. It's the AoE version of Sleet Snake, dealing 150 AoE damage for 6 pips, or 350 if you have a shield or a trap. This condition is the easiest ever to pull off, since stun blocks count, so you could just plop a single Aegis of Artemis on round 1, and then you're good to go. It's also insanely easy to build pips as Ice Colossus, given you have so many 0 pip options. So an easy strat is to just keep 0 pip shielding, and then unleash this massive 350 AoE hit once you reach 6 pips for the win. So yeah, this form is nuts. What I do is stock up on all 0-pip shield battle cards, then spam shields every single round, and either launch a Phoenix or 875 shield depending on the circumstance. Either one should win you the fight. 125 value per pip for a large form is disgustingly good, and it's fun to play since you don't get targeted first, and you always have a lot of spell options. Congrats to Ice Colossus on being our second S tier. No ice form compares to Ice Colossus, which we just finished covering, but if any form came close, Ice Croc would be it. This is another weird case like Life Drake, where a medium-sized form starts with 3 pips, except this time, you have access to 200 shields and 225 hits, which are amazing options on round 1. Ice Croc builds pips very well too, unlike its medium-sized counterpart Ice Minotaur. Even if you swapped the bonus pips with Ice Minnow, such that Ice Croc started with 2, and Ice Minnow started with 3 pips, Ice Croc would still be the better form. Let's check out its spells. Chilling Touch is a 0-pip 50 hit that stuns if the opponent's trapped. It's pretty easy to pull off this condition since you have access to traps, so when you do, it's great. Mummy Wraps is another 0-pip spell that casts a 75 shield as well as a stun block. Stun blocks are extremely useful in Beastmoon, and 75 is great value for 0 pips, but it is a worse version of Ice Colossus' Aegis of Artemis, which is odd, because the large form should be getting the lower value. Recycle Ward places a 1-pip 100 shield and clears a trap for another 100 shield. Again, in my opinion, it's a worse version of Ice Colossus' Scrap Trap. Snowstalker's great. For 1 pip, it deals 75 damage, but if the opponent has a blade, this clears it and does 150 damage instead. It's a fantastic blade punisher. Crystal Scarab is a 2-pip 150 hit that gives you a 125 shield if the opponent has a trap. It's alright. I'm a big fan of Ancient Wraps. It's a 2-pip 200 shield with an additional stun block. The fact that you could spam it twice in a row on rounds 1 and 2 since you start with 3 pips is amazing. Disarming Trap slaps a heavy 225 trap on the opponent for 3 pips, and can clear a blade for an additional 125 trap. That's pretty great value if the opponent's bladed, but personally, I prefer the next spell better. And that spell is Evertide Snowman, dealing a straight 225 damage for 3 pips. Normally, a 75 damage per pip hit like this isn't special, but the fact that Ice Croc can belt it out on round 1 immediately makes it insanely useful. Gelid Ancestor deals a weak 125 AoE damage for 4 pips, but if any opponents are bladed, it'll clear the blade and deal 250 damage instead. The conditionless value is just too low to be useful in most cases though. Shivering Marid is a 5-pip 200 AoE hit, but will deal 325 damage instead on any enemies that are weakened. It's a bit out of place on Ice Croc since no other spells have this weakness condition, and again, the value's just not high enough. Stick to your single hits. All in all, it's not fair to follow up Ice Colossus with Ice Croc, since as you saw, most of Ice Colossus' shields and hits are better, which again is kind of strange since Ice Colossus is the larger form, but it's Ice Croc's 2 additional bonus pips that makes it extremely threatening early on in combat. The ability to spam 200 shields or begin with a 225 hit, along with its tanky 500 HP, make it way better than other forms. It's a solid form, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't also deserve a spot in S tier. What are the odds I roll 3 ice forms in a row? And on top of that, what are the odds I roll them in descending order? That's right, if you thought preceding my Ice Croc review with Ice Colossus made Ice Croc look bad, then you'll definitely think preceding Ice Elf with Ice Colossus and Ice Croc will make Ice Elf look abominable. And it's true. Ice Elf really isn't that great. It's one of the only 2 forms in the game to begin a fight with 4 pips, which makes it pretty versatile, but it's a double-edged sword because your deck is clogged with tons of 0 and 1 pip spells, so often you'll die quickly without being able to take advantage of all of your bonus pips. Let's take a look. Snowball Storm deals 50 damage for 0 pips, and throws on a 50 weakness if the opponent already has a weakness. This condition's not great. Stacking weaknesses generally isn't good because your opponent will most likely just cast a small 0 pip hit to remove them all at once. And since you'll have tons of pips as Ice Elf, you're better off casting bigger spells and discarding these smaller ones. Flash Freeze is your better 0 pip option, but again, you'll often want to discard it for higher pip cost spells. It deals the same amount of damage, but instead clears a blade to give yourself a pip. That's a pretty useful condition, considering blades are so rampant in Beastmoon these days. Shatter Strike rocks. I think of it as a better Stormwolf Owl, since it deals 75 damage for 1 pip, and stuns if you have a shield or trap. Meaning if you shield yourself on round 1, you could pull off dirty stun chaining on your opponents by spamming this every single round. Shivering Swarm isn't bad at all. It's a 1 pip 125 trap that clears a blade for 50 damage, meaning if your opponent's bladed, it'll deal a straight up 175 damage for 1 pip. I recommend this over Flash Freeze if you're looking for a blade clear. For 1 pip, Fateful Ward casts a 75 shield and gives a pip. That's great value for just 1 pip. I'd recommend casting this on yourself round 1, and then unleashing your 5 pip AoE trap on round 2, which we'll cover shortly. Snow Panther's interesting. It's just a 2 pip 150 hit, which is pretty awful for a small form, but sadly, it's your biggest single hit, so for that reason alone, you'll need to rely on it often for dealing damage. Resolution's a hefty 3 pip 300 shield that clears a weakness for a pip. Very solid value, and a great round 1 option on yourself if you don't think you'll survive. Ominous Ward's the bigger version of Fateful Ward, costing 4 pips to cast a 100 shield and giving 3 pips. It's pretty useful to cast on a teammate that's preparing for an AoE hit, but otherwise, it's not great. So far, Ice Elf doesn't seem too special, but don't be fooled, because the spell Debilitate alone is the reason Ice Elf is such an offensive threat that should be taken out immediately. It's a massive 5 pip AoE 250 trap that clears any opponent's blades for 100 extra damage. So if your opponent's bladed, you'll deal a straight up 350 damage to them. If you pull this off, it's almost always game over for the opponents, since you can then just tap them for the kill. And since you start the fight with 4 pips, you can bust this spell out as early as round 2. Lastly, Bracing Cold is a 6 pip friendly AoE that gives 3 pips to everyone on your team. And if you're already trapped or shielded, it'll tack on an additional AoE 150 shield. The value here is excellent because the condition is easy to pull off, but you're always better off casting your 5 pip AoE trap instead, and you won't last long enough to have 6 pips. So discard this every single time. Overall, Ice Elf's got too many small pip spells that clog up its deck. You'll often die before being able to use all your pips, which is why your best bet is to just 5 pip AoE trap on round 2, then die. This makes Ice Elf a one-trick pony that can make gameplay pretty boring. Fortunately, if you don't pull your AoE trap on round 2, you can always just relentlessly stun chain until you pull it, or drop a hefty 300 shield on yourself. So you do have some other options. But the fact that your health is just so low and you can't deal more than 150 damage in a single hit puts Ice Elf right in C tier. Talk about one-trick ponies. Fire Rat's the king of doing one thing, and it does it very well. Pacify into a 4 pip AoE hit. But let's take it slow and go over each spell. S'more Power is a weak 75 damage over time for 0 pips. But if you target an enemy minion, it'll expel it for a minion of your own. Let's take a minute to check out Fire Rat's minion. It's actually a Life School minion named Healthy Marshfellow that has 125 HP and repeatedly casts a 0 pip heal over time on an ally every round. Once it hits 4 pips, it'll cast a 4 pip 200 AoE heal over time on all teammates. This is definitely one of the worst minions in Beastmoon. Its spells are pretty awful since heal over times don't actually revive players. However, some of Fire Rat's spells have heal over time conditions, so fortunately, you are able to combo off any heal over times your minion casts on you. So overall, this spell's not great. 75 damage over time means each tick only deals a measly 25 damage. Expelling a minion for a minion of your own is neat, but not a frequent condition you'll be pulling off. As a small form that starts with so many pips, you definitely won't be needing this. Charbroil is your better 0-pip option, dealing 75 damage all at once instead of over time. And it'll also heal you a 50 HP if you already have a heal over time on yourself. Not the most appealing condition, but 75 damage for 0 pips isn't bad at all. Douse the Flames is part 1 of Fire Rat's signature strategy, and the reason why this form can be devastatingly powerful. It's a standard 2-round self-pacify, meaning for 2 rounds, your opponents won't be able to target you. It's the perfect setup on round 1 to safely drop a massive 4-pip AoE hit on round 2, but more on that later. Simmering Heat is a 1-pip 200 damage over time that can clear a shield for a 75 trap. Not a bad condition, especially since the trap will be used immediately by the damage over time, giving no time for your opponent to push or clear it. Not a bad spell. Toasting Fire's excellent. It's a 1-pip 125 hit that'll summon a minion if your target has a damage over time on them, so it's a great follow-up to any damage over times you place on your opponent. Boiling Point's a 2-pip 300 damage over time that places a 125 trap if the opposing team has a minion. Even without the condition, this is pretty solid, since each tick deals 100 damage for 3 rounds. But if your opponents are dumb enough to cast a minion, you're getting a whopping 425 value for just 2 pips. And again, that trap gets used immediately because of the damage over time. Refiner's Fire isn't too great. It's a 2-pip 300 heal over time that clears a trap to activate the heal over time. Given that you're an offensive small form, your opponents will most likely target and kill you first, meaning that you'd be the first one on your team to lose health, so ideally you'd cast this spell on yourself. But the fact that it's a slow heal over time will not be able to save you from a bunch of opponents dogpiling on you as early as round 1. So the only time you'll ever want to use this is if your opponents for some reason trapped you, because then you'd clear it for a full heal. But most of the time, it's useless. Forge's Fire is a 3-pip 400 heal over time that gives yourself a pip if you have a heal over time. There's really no need to ever cast a heal over time as hefty as this. If you're already at 3 pips, you're better off just discarding it and saving for an AoE hit the following round. Boiling Heat's incredible, and the second part of Fire Rat's signature 2-round strat. First, you'll want to pacify in round 1. So on round 2, you could safely drop this whopping 4-pip 300 AoE damage over time that clears any opponent's shield for an extra 125 trap. This is incredibly high damage per pip, up to 425 value on any shielded opponents. And again, you don't have to worry about these conditional traps being removed, since they'll be used immediately from the damage over time. As long as you survive on round 1, you can fry all your opponents on round 2. Lastly, Cleansing Flame is a 5-pip 375 AoE damage over time that clears a trap on yourself for an additional 125 AoE damage. It's also an incredible AoE hit that serves as a backup plan on round 3 while you're still pacified, in case you don't pull your 4-pip AoE hit on round 2. But I'd still prefer casting that 4-pip AoE hit on round 2 for quicker damage. Overall, Fire Rat's a one-trick pony. Every single fight you should do one thing: pacify on round 1 into your 4-pip AoE hit on round 2. And if you pull this off, it's extremely effective, so make sure you stock up on battle cards for these spells. Otherwise, the form's pretty subpar. Sure, you could play off the heal over times casted from yourself and your minion, but it's just the wrong mechanic for a small offensive form that dies too quickly like Fire Rat. The whole minion and heal over time mechanic would be much better suited on a large form that lasts longer in a fight. I'm gonna place Fire Rat in C tier, because it very easily can die on round 1 before the pacify takes effect. Talk about a coincidence. Can't believe I rolled the only 2 small fire forms back to back. And the fact I covered Fire Rat first certainly won't do Fire Elf any justice, because in reality, Fire Elf's really just a Fire Rat that doesn't have its amazing 2-round pacify AoE strat. Sure, it has a very nice 3-pip damage over time that Fire Rat doesn't, but the lack of pacify protection usually results in Fire Elf dying so quickly it won't be able to do anything too useful. Let's check out its spells. Hearth Elf is a 0 pip 75 hit that throws on an extra 75 damage over time if you have a shield. Definitely a weird condition to have as a fire form, and one you won't pull off often. But if you do, that's a whopping 150 value for no pips at all. Flaming Arrow is Fire Elf's worst 0 pip option. It's literally just a Beastmoon burn TC, dealing 75 damage over time for 0 pips. Not great. Flames of Fury isn't bad at all. A 1 pip 125 hit, classic for an offensive small form. It'll also give you a pip back if you have a heal over time, but this will rarely ever happen. It's still a solid hit though. Irksome Mander is an amazing ice counter. It's a 1 pip 200 damage over time that clears a shield for 75 extra damage. On its own, it's alright. With its condition, it's even better. But when you pull this condition specifically off against an ice form, it's insane. This is because you'd be getting 5 additional 25 damage boosts, resulting in a massive 400 damage for one single pip. This doesn't happen often though. Dive Bomber Beetle is a 2 pip 125 hit that detonates a damage over time. It's an awesome spell to cast on round 2 after casting a damage over time on round 1. Slithering Cinders is simply just a 2 pip 300 damage over time. Pretty great value, and this is your best bet on round 1 if you're planning to detonate on round 2. That combo would deal 425 damage in total by round 2, enough to kill any small forms and even some medium-sized forms. But an even better round 1 strat for Fire Elf is just to cast Volatile Blaze. It deals an astronomical 450 damage over time for 3 pips, and it'll detonate immediately if the opponent has a weakness. This 150 damage per pip is phenomenal, and the fact you can bust it out on round 1 is insane. Fiery Spirit's not the greatest. For 3 pips, you deal 75 damage over time to yourself and give 3 pips to an ally. It really just serves as a last resort in case you pull absolute garbage in your hand and you know you won't survive till the next round. In that case, abort mission and hand off 3 pips to your teammate. It's always a good way to clear a weakness on yourself too. Blaze of Glory is an instant discard. I'm not sure why Fire Elf even has this spell. For 4 pips, you deal 250 damage to yourself, basically killing you to give 3 pips to everyone on your team. I can't imagine this ever being useful unless maybe in a spiral fight if you're about to die. But still, you should always discard this. Searcher's Rage is a 5 pip 300 AoE damage over time that clears a shield on any opposing player for an additional 125 damage. Fire Rat's AoE is just objectively so much better, literally costing 1 fewer pip. And unlike Fire Rat, you can't pacify yourself to ensure you stay alive long enough to use it. So often you'll want to just discard this. Still though, it's decent damage per pip, so you gotta give it a little credit. Overall, Fire Elf's not that great. You have 2 main strategies. Slithering Cinders round 1 into Dive Bomber Beetle round 2 for a total of 425 damage if you live long enough. Or even better, if you get lucky enough to pull Volatile Blaze on round 1, just bust that out immediately for 450 damage over time. But other than that, you don't really have anything that special, and Fire Elf usually just dies so fast you'd be lucky enough to make it past round 1. I'd throw it in C tier. I know you were all waiting for this. Let's just get this out of the way right now. Storm Elf's the best form in the entire game, no doubt about it. As you'll see, it's literally the only form in the game that doesn't have a single bad spell. It has the ability to spam 2 pip 250s, pull off high damage stun chains, and bust out incredible AoEs. It's a glass cannon that wreaks havoc on anything in its path. Literal lightning in a bottle. Let's get right into it. Static Discharge is a 0 pip 75 hit that adds on a 50 trap if the opponent has any type of overtime. Solid damage with a decent condition. Believe it or not, You'll usually want to discard this just to make room for even better higher pip spells. Galvanize is a 0 pip 75 blade that removes a weakness. Again, solid value, and clearing a weakness can always come in handy. Zap is a standard 1 pip 125 hit. Great value if you're only at 1 pip, and a solid way to use any blades on yourself. I love it. Power Surge is a 1 pip 125 blade that clears a damage over time for an additional 75 blade on yourself. It's a perfect damage over time punishment. Time to get into Storm Elf's really overpowered spells. Nerve Shock slams the opponent with 125 damage and a guaranteed stun for 2 pips. Since you start the fight with 3 pips, you can stun chain by spamming this on your opponent twice in a row, while simultaneously dealing 250 damage in total. No other stun chain is as powerful as this. It's a broken way to start off any fight, and you should absolutely stock up on battle cards for this. But don't worry if you don't pull Nerve Shock on round 1. Instead, you can always drop a massive 2 pip 250 hit with Bluster Blast, and potentially clear a damage over time for a pip back. Seriously, this spell is insane. Just like Nerve Shock, you could spam this back to back on rounds 1 and 2 for a total of 500 damage, killing any small or even medium-sized form. 250 damage for 2 pips is insanely good, and if you pull off the condition, that's literally 250 damage for 1 pip. It's another broken spell that I also recommend getting extra battle cards for. Precipitous is a 3 pip 125 AoE blade that also removes a weakness from everyone on your team. On any other form, this spell would be excellent, but compared to Storm Elf's completely overpowered spells, it's on the underwhelming side, so generally, you'd want to discard it. Just like many other small forms, Storm Elf also has a last resort pip donation spell. For 3 pips, you give 3 pips and throw on an extra 125 blade if you have a heal over time on yourself. For other small forms with worse spells, a pip donation like this is useful to pass the baton to your teammate. But for a form like Storm Elf, you always want to go down with a bang, so you're better off discarding this and just using Nerve Shock or Bluster Blast. Energy Wave is a 4 pip 250 AoE hit that also throws a 100 trap on any opponent with any overtime. You can dish this out as early as round 2 for devastating AoE damage. It's extremely good. Energy Pulse is a 5 pip 250 AoE hit, and if anyone on your team has a damage over time, it'll clear it and give them a pip. Because it costs 1 more pip, it's not as good as Energy Wave, and you'll most likely want to discard it, but of course, it's still a great spell. Overall, Storm Elf is broken. It's the most powerful form in the game, and can knock out any other form with ease due to its high bonus pip limit, combined with its incredible damage per pip and stun chains. You'll want to stock up on Nerve Shocks and Bluster Blasts, and bust them out every round until you die. Of course, Storm Elf's a small form, so it does die easily, but that shouldn't matter if you play it right. Obviously, Storm Elf fits right into S tier. Death Cyclops is a bulky form you should play if you get bored of dying, and just want to maximize playtime. And that's because your opponents will never see you as a threat, so they'll leave you as the last man standing in almost every single fight. But is that a good thing? It depends. Let's check out its cards. Pluto's a 0 pip 50 hit that steals a heal over time. It's alright for chipping away at your opponent, but it's nothing special. Phantom Pain is great. It's a 0 pip 75 weakness, and it's your better 0 pip option. By spamming these, you can keep your teammates alive for a while. I actually really like Pernicious Pig because of its condition. It's a 1 pip 150 damage over time that throws on an extra 75 damage over time if your opponent's trapped. And as you'll see shortly, it's incredibly easy to trap your opponent, so you're almost always getting 225 value for 1 pip. For a large form, that's excellent. Then you have Unseelie Ally. It's a 2 pip 200 damage over time that also throws on a 100 heal absorb. At first glance, this looks awful because let's be honest, a 100 heal absorb is almost always useless. However, ironically, because the heal absorb is so useless, most opponents don't clear it, and it serves as a permanent trap on your opponent, counting towards Pernicious Pig's condition. So you can use this spell on round 1, then spam Pernicious Pigs for 225 damage each on the following rounds. Not a bad strat. Betrayal's a 3-pip 200 trap that clears a blade for a 75 weakness. It's not bad, but 200 value for a 3-pip trap just seems a little too low. Foul Concoction is a 3-pip afterlife you cast on an ally, such that once they die, it triggers a 250 AoE damage over time on all opponents. This is solid damage over time value for just 3 pips, but the fact you can't easily time the triggering of the AoE damage definitely hinders the spell. Wave of Frailty is an instant discard. 4 pips for a 150 AoE weakness. Unless you're in a spiral fight, it's never a good deal. Scrap it. If you do have 4 pips though, your much better option is Herald of Hades. It's a 4-pip 200 drain, and since Death Cyclops has so much health, it's very easy to time this spell to get the full drain value, so you're often getting 400 value for 4 pips. That's insanely good, and a great way to keep yourself alive. Champion's Blight is the AoE version of Unseelie Ally. It's a 5-pip 250 AoE damage over time that also drops a 100 heal absorb on all opponents. The damage over time is just too low to be useful for the cost of 5 pips, but it's still your better AoE option. And that's because your worse AoE option is Confounding Fiend, a 5-pip 125 AoE hit that clears any opponent's blades for a 100 weakness. The condition's okay, but the damage per pip is horrendous. You'll never want to cast this. Overall, Death Cyclops is a forgettable form that's very slow at damaging opponents. Your best bet is just spamming weaknesses every round until you have enough pips for a 200 drain. Otherwise, just chain a bunch of damage over times. But again, even if the damage is okay, it's just very slow and it's not very effective. I'd place Death Cyclops in C tier. Life Cyclops is the best healer in the game. It's completely broken because of just one card. It's 1-pip heal. This spell has a gimmick unlike any other life form, and I'll explain why shortly. Let's start from the top. Angelic Wrath is a 0-pip 75 damage over time that pushes a damage over time. It's a great way to counter any damage over times placed on you, and even without this condition, 75 value for 0 pips is solid on a large form. Arboreal Assault is a measly 0-pip 25 hit, but if casted on an opposing minion, it'll expel it, so it's really only useful against a minion. Otherwise, its damage isn't even noticeable. Alright, get ready. Nurture is, in my opinion, the greatest spell in the entire game. It's a 1-pip 25 heal that also gives a pip, but if your ally is dead, it'll give 2 pips. Don't be fooled by this low heal value. If you revive an ally with it, they'll start the following round with 3 pips. But you need to be careful with order and positioning. Make sure you are in last position as Life Cyclops and reviving an ally in first position on the round your opponents start before you. If you follow this criteria, it's guaranteed your newly revived ally gets a free turn with 3 pips since they'll start first that round. That means, if paired with a Stormcroc, you can keep spam reviving and pulling off 300 damage sharks. Or if paired with a Death Fairy, you can revive them into a free big drain. Again, in order to pull this off, your ally has to die before you, you need to be in last position, and you need to cast the revive on the turn where the opponents are first in order. So it requires some intelligence and skill. But if you follow these steps, you'll be unstoppable and win almost every fight. So on the other hand, if you're up against a Life Cyclops, always take them out first so they don't use this strategy on you. Battlecry is a 1-pip afterlife you cast on an opponent that gives everyone on your team a 50 blade once that opponent dies. I wish this spell did a little upfront damage as well, because its blade value just seems a little too low. Also, you have a better afterlife option I'll talk about shortly, so often you'll just want to discard this one. Gah Spider's a 2-pip 100 hit that will deal 250 damage instead if the opposing team has a minion out. This is an extremely effective minion counter that punishes opponents hard. Put it this way, if you're against a large myth form like Myth Colossus that's dumb enough to cast their minion, it only takes 2 of these spiders to kill them. And given you don't have many other hits, you'll want to rely on these for damage. Turn the Tables isn't good. It costs 3 pips to take a damage over time from everyone on your team, then push them all to the opponent. So it's good at countering incoming fire AoEs, but it's a bit too situational to be useful, so you'll want to discard it. Semi-Charmed Sprite is a decent way to keep yourself alive as you're taking hits. It's a 3-pip 300 heal over time that also gives yourself an extra 50 heal if you have a blade, but in most cases, it's not too useful. Glorious Unicorn's the AoE version of Nurture, meaning it's just as fantastic. For 4 pips, you heal everyone on your team 50 HP and give them a pip, and if any allies are being revived, it gives them 2 pips instead. It's an amazing way to bring back dead teammates and requires all the same strategy I explained while covering the spell Nurture. Stand Fast is a 4-pip afterlife you cast on an opponent such that once they die, everyone on your team gets healed for 150. At face value, this spell's pretty great, but it gets even better. Unlike most afterlife spells, if you cast this on an already downed opponent, it still works, meaning if any dead opponents on the other team are dumb enough to not flee against you, you could just cast it on their dead bodies for a free 150 AoE heal. That's awesome. No Mercy is the AoE version of Gah Spider. It's a 5-pip 125 AoE hit that deals 325 damage instead if the opponents have a minion out. Just like Gah Spider, this is an incredible minion punisher, but it's not often you'll pull this condition off, so in reality, it's not a very useful spell. Overall, Life Cyclops is an unstoppable healing force, enabling teammates to whip out 3-pip hits straight out of Revival. It's a high-skill form that does require following a certain set of criteria. Make sure you're in last position every fight, and only revive on the turns your opponents go first in order. So, if you're dumb enough to start a fight as Life Cyclops, or revive on the turns your team has order priority, you may as well just flee since you're gonna lose anyway. But hey, once you learn the strat, nothing can stop you, except your severe lack of damage output. For that reason, I'm throwing Life Cyclops in B tier. Mithrat's the second best small form in the game, right behind Stormelf. It's basically a Stormelf that can't stun chain, but even without this ability, it's still better than almost every other form in the game. Mithrat's a beast, and you better take it out quickly or it'll wreck you. Let's go one by one. For 0 pips, Pushback pushes a trap, then deals 75 damage. This is an incredible condition, being able to quickly throw a trap right back to your opponent and activate it immediately with 75 damage. Even without the condition, 75 damage for 0 pips is solid. This is a great spell to use on round 1, to then follow up with a 4-pip AoE hit on round 2. Simple Minion summons a Lumbering Minion for 0 pips. At 125 HP, this minion either casts a 50 weakness or 50 mantle for 0 pips every round until it reaches 4 pips. Then it'll cast a 4-pip 100 AoE trap. It's a solid minion that's very effective at debuffing opponents. Problem is, Mithrat dies so quickly so you'll hardly ever get any use out of it. I'd recommend casting Pushback instead if you're looking to build pips for your AoE. Bloodthirsty Bat is a 1-pip 125 hit that'll deal 200 damage instead if your target has a damage over time. It's not a great condition since you yourself can't cast damage over times, but 125 damage per pip is solid nonetheless. Disarming Spirit is much better. It's also a 1-pip 125 hit, but it'll clear a blade for a 50 weakness. Blades are very prevalent in Beastmoon, and this spell quickly turns the tables with them. Rat Trap's Mithrat's third 1-pip 125 hit that'll deal 175 instead if you have a trap on yourself. Again, great damage per pip, but if you do find yourself with a trap on, you're much better off countering with Pushback instead. Basic Bruiser's a 2-pip 250 hit. No condition needed. This damage is incredible, and it's a phenomenal way to take out your opponents early on. And given that you start the fight with 3 pips, you can spam these trolls one after another for massive damage. Demoralize is a 3-pip 125 AoE weakness that only works if your team has a minion up. It's not too common that you'll cast your minion, and even if you do pull this off, Mithrat has so many better damage options that it's not worth debuffing opponents. I discard this every single time to make room for your hits. Striking Ifrit is a 4-pip AoE hit that slams each opponent with 250 damage and stuns anyone that has a trap on them. This damage per pip is insane, and you can cast it as early as round 2. Unless you pull a troll on round 1 to take out a single opponent, I recommend just casting Pushback for 0 pips, and then following up with this AoE hit on round 2 for maximum damage. Charlatan's Deceit costs 5 pips to sacrifice a minion to deal 325 AoE damage, so this is another spell that only works if your team has a minion up. It's the worst of your 2 AoE hits, because even though this deals more damage, it's tough to stay alive long enough for 5 pips and guarantee you have a minion ready to be sacrificed. If the stars do align though, and you find yourself in a slow-paced fight where you can safely cast it, then definitely use it. But normally, you just want to play it safe and discard it for your Ifrit AoE instead. Continuing this trend of spells that only work if you have a minion out, Share Power costs 5 pips to target a minion for an AoE 2-round double pip aura. So it basically costs 5 pips to give everyone on your team 2 pips. This spell is god-awful, and I'm surprised it even exists in the first place. 1, for a small form, the value is not worth it. 5 pips for 2 pips for all simply isn't good. Medium forms have better value. 2, it requires a minion to be up on your side, which again is uncommon for Mithrat. 3, the fact it's a double pip aura means the donation is slower than just giving all the pips at once. And 4, it's unlikely you'll ever make it to 5 pips as Mithrat before dying anyway. So yeah, please discard this spell every single time. Overall, Mithrat's the second best glass cannon in the game, right behind Stormelf. Even though its health is low, its damage per pip makes up more than enough for it, resulting in opponents usually targeting and killing you as soon as possible. You have 2 main strategies as Mithrat. Either spam trolls for 250 each, wreaking single damage havoc until you die, or cast a 0 pip spell on round 1 into striking Ifrit on round 2 for absurd AoE damage. Either strat works wonders and will almost always result in your team winning. One downside to playing Mithrat that doesn't matter competitively, but is still something to consider, is that Mithrat's just plain boring to play as. You basically just hit and then die on round 1 or 2. You'll spend more time dead in base than actually on the playing field, but hey, it's worth it if you want to win. Mithrat definitely belongs in S tier. Fire Pig's one of the best ice counters in the game, completely decimating shields and slow roasting opponents. It has solid damage per pip and tons of attack options, so you'll never waste a turn. Let's check out its spells one by one. Cindertooth costs 0 pips to deal 75 damage over time, and it clears a shield. It's Fire Pig's only 0 pip spell and provides solid damage and utility, especially against ice forms, so it's your go-to spell for pip building. Backdrafter costs 1 pip to deal 100 damage and summons a backdraft minion if the target has a damage over time on them. This minion has a measly 50 HP and passes 2 rounds in a row until it casts a 3 pip sacrificial 100 AoE damage over time. Obviously, this minion stinks. However, the purpose of this minion isn't for the damage it does, but rather to combo it with your other minion conditional spells. I'll cover this later on, but for now, just know that casting your minion allows some of your other spells to deal much more damage, so its existence alone is useful, and even without the condition, 100 damage for 1 pip is great. Garmer's Growl costs 2 pips to deal 225 damage over time, and will detonate immediately if you have a heal over time on yourself. This condition is hard to pull off since it's not often you'll find yourself having a heal over time, so you're much better off casting a 2 pip 200 instead. Speaking of 2 pip 200s, take a look at Pyredon. It's a 2 pip 200 hit that casts an additional 150 damage over time if you have your minion out. This means it could deal a whopping 350 damage, which is insane, but the condition will take a few rounds of preparation. But even without the condition, it's an excellent choice to cast on round 1 to quickly take out an opponent. Fire Pig's second 2-pip 200 Smoke Spirit deals, well, 200 damage for 2 pips, and gives you back 2 pips if you cast it on an opponent's minion. So in other words, it's basically a 0-pip 200 hit if used on a minion. So it's a minion killer. And again, even without the condition, 200 damage for 2 pips is perfect. Hot Hand is Fire Pig's second 2-pip 225 damage over time. Noticing a lot of repeated spells, right? Everything I said about Garmer's Growl holds true for this spell, except this time there's no condition. So again, this spell is decent, but you're better off casting one of your 2-pip 200s instead. Benu Alight is a very unique niche spell. It costs 3 pips to deal 150 damage over time, and removes all shields from the enemy. The damage per pip is awful, but the condition is what makes the spell stand out. As of right now, no other spell in the entire game can clear all shields on a target. So you should really only use this during extremely specific scenarios where you're against an opponent that has multiple shields. For instance, if used against an Ice Colossus that casted a shield every previous round, this spell can deal insane value by clearing literally all of them. But in most cases against unshielded opponents, this spell is worthless and should just be discarded. So generally speaking, it's not a great spell. Scorch Bats is horrible. It costs 4 pips to deal 150 AoE damage and clear 1 shield on each opponent. This damage per pip is god awful, but the condition can be useful if your opponent's just AoE shielded. I'd still discard this every time, since you have a much better AoE option. And that better AoE option is Fiery Doom. It's the AoE equivalent of Pyredon, costing 4 pips to deal 200 AoE damage and tacking on an extra 150 AoE damage over time if you have your minion out. Again, this condition takes a few rounds of prep, but if you're able to get that minion out, this AoE hit becomes devastatingly powerful. Even without the condition, a 4-pip 200 AoE is not bad. The only thing is it's difficult to build pips as Fire Pig, so I still prefer single hitting with 2-pip 200s instead. Lastly, Cinderbird is Fire Pig's third AoE spell, costing 5 pips to deal 250 AoE damage and detonating a damage over time on every opponent. But it requires a minion to be sacrificed, which ends up making it pretty unusable, whereas Fiery Doom only requires a minion to increase its damage but could still be casted without one. Cinderbird requires a minion just to use it at all. And 4 pips is already hard enough to come by as Fire Pig, so you can imagine how rarely you'll find yourself sitting on 5 pips to cast this. Definitely discard this spell every single time. Overall, Fire Pig is phenomenal at countering shields and dishing 2-pip 200s. In fact, your best strat in a fight is literally just a 200, then Cindertooth, then 200, then Cindertooth, and repeat for maximum damage output. So you really just care about a few spells in your deck, making it unfortunate that Fire Pig comes with so much extra filler. Just discard your AoEs and damage over times, and stock up on battle cards for your 2-pip 200s, and you're good to go. Against ice forms, however, you should utilize your 2-pip damage over times, as each tick gets an additional 25 boost, so you'll end up accumulating massive damage. Overall, I'd place Fire Pig right in B tier. It's not a bad form, but it has trouble building pips, and has a lot of useless cards that clutter its deck. Fire Colossus is a bulky form that excels at building pips and dishing out AoE damage. It also makes use of mantles, which isn't the most reliable utility, but if you get lucky, it can come in handy. Let's check out its spells. Full Steam gives a pip for 0 pips and can also clear a trap to give yourself another pip. Look familiar? That's because Mythdrake has the same exact spell, which is weird, since both forms are very different. For a medium-sized form like Mythdrake, this is already amazing, so for a large form like Fire Colossus, it's even better. You definitely want to stock up on these. Smoke Bomb is Fire Colossus's only other 0-pip spell, casting a mantle on the opponent. It's risky, but if you get lucky with the opponent fizzling, it's extremely useful. I personally don't love banking on randomness. You're much safer and get better value casting Full Steam to build pips. Conflagration casts a 150 damage over time and clears a shield to summon a Living Flame minion. This minion's similar to Fire Pig's. At 75 health, it passes twice, then casts a sacrificial AoE mantle. Just like Fire Pig's minion, the minion itself stinks, but its purpose is to chain into minion conditions on your other spells. Overall, this spell has pretty decent value and can effectively counter shields. Fire and Smoke is a 2-pip 225 damage over time, and it throws a mantle if the opponent has a minion out. Not the greatest damage per pip, but for a large form like Fire Colossus, it's pretty solid. Flame Burst is a 2-pip 150 hit that detonates a damage over time if your team has a minion out. It's really not a great spell, anymore that is. Back when Fire Colossus was released, the spell was actually a 2-pip 200, which was absurdly overpowered for a large form. Then during KI's Spring 2022 balance patch, its damage got reduced from 200 to 150, matching most other large forms' 75 damage per pip. It's no longer overpowered, and instead just an average 2-pip hit, which is decent if you're looking to bust out some damage. Thermodynamics is weird. For 2 pips, you place a 75 damage over time on yourself for a 200 heal over time on an ally. This totals to 125 value for 2 pips, which is god awful, and the fact that you can't revive with it makes it even worse. It's really only okay for clearing weaknesses on yourself, but even then you're probably better off just hitting through a weakness instead. Discard the spell every single time. Sacrificial Flame costs 3 pips to place a 125 shield on everyone on your team and remove a shield from all opponents. The shield value isn't anything special, and it's not often that all your opponents are shielded, so the second half of the spell is pretty useless. But the worst part of all is that it requires a minion to sacrifice, so without a minion you can't even cast this. Keep in mind, Fire Colossus can only cast minions in the first place if opponents are shielded, so you almost always won't even be able to cast this spell. Discard it every time. Scouring Inferno isn't that bad. It costs 4 pips to deal 225 AoE damage over time, and since you can pip yourself on round 1, you're able to drop this AoE as early as round 2. It's a solid option to start racking up damage on all opponents. I don't even want to explain this next spell, but I will anyway. Before I begin, just know you should discard this every single time. For 4 pips, Pyrodynamics deals 200 direct damage to yourself, drops a 225 damage over time on all enemies, and a 200 heal over time on everyone on your team. That's a mouthful. Again, the AoE heal over time effect simply isn't worth it, so this spell's basically just a Scouring Inferno that additionally hurts yourself for 200 damage. Obviously, just use Scouring Inferno instead and prevent yourself from taking all that self-damage. Discard this. Oh, one quick note. Interestingly enough, this spell's the only one in the game with an overtime not divisible by 25. The 200 AoE heal over time occurs over 3 rounds, meaning it's healing for about 66.67 HP per tick. But you never even know this because no one cast this spell anyway. Fire Colossus's best spell is easily Fire Blast. For 5 pips, you dish out 250 AoE damage and detonate a damage over time on all enemies if your minion is out. This condition rarely gets pulled off, but it shouldn't matter anyway, because this spell's damage per pip is high enough already. A good strategy is pipping yourself on round 1, mantling on round 2, then unleashing this beast of an AoE spell on round 3, dealing massive damage to all opponents. Overall, Fire Colossus is a pretty tanky form that excels at dishing out fast-paced AoE damage. Your single hit spell value isn't anything special, so your best bet is just pipping yourself as early as round 1 into Scouring Inferno, or even better, waiting an extra turn than casting Fire Blast. Use mantles if you're feeling lucky, but don't count on them to always work out. Unfortunately, Fire Colossus's deck is filled with lots of garbage that should be instantly discarded, and it's also unfortunate that both your minion and your minion conditions stink, but if you pull your pip donations and AoE hits, you could be a massive threat to your opponents. I'd place Fire Colossus in D tier. When you ask anyone what the weakest form in the game is, Ice Wolf almost always comes to mind. It's tied with Life Cyclops for having the lowest damage output in the game, sitting at a measly 50 damage per pip. Even though it can't beat down its opponents, what it lacks in damage gets made up for in its shield value, which often gets overlooked by players. Ice Wolf also has some pretty incredible utility. Let's take a look at its spells. Bracing Frost is a 0 pip 100 shield that clears a weakness for a pip. excellent value for 0 pips, and an amazing condition. Snow Fort is Ice Wolf's second 0 pip 100 shield that clears a trap. Again, excellent shield value with a very useful condition. We're only 2 spells in, and right away we can see that Ice Wolf removes both weaknesses and traps. You'll want to spam both these shield spells as much as possible for maximum value as you build pips. Brisk Blast is a 0 pip 25 hit that'll give you a pip if you have a shield or trap on yourself. Obviously, this damage value is the worst, but since your opponents will never target you, you could shield yourself on round 1, then spam these snakes to keep generating pips. So you should really think of this spell as just a 0 pip self-pip donation, which isn't that bad. Shatter Squall is a 1 pip 50 hit that clears a blade for a 75 trap. Without the condition, this spell is not worth using, but if your opponent is bladed, then it's an excellent counter. Winter Blast is incredibly situational. It's an awful 2 pip 100 hit, but if your team has a minion up, it'll deal 225 damage instead. This is some insane value, especially for a large form like Ice Wolf, so you'll usually only want to be paired with forms that cast minions if you're playing as Ice Wolf, but without a minion up, this spell is garbage. Freeze Blast is a 3 pip 150 hit that stuns your opponent if they have a damage over time. Of course, you can't cast damage over times yourself, so this condition rarely gets pulled off, and even with the condition, the damage is just so incredibly low that it's not worth using. For 4 pips, Blizzard Wind deals 225 damage and casts a 125 shield on yourself. So you're getting 350 value for 4 pips every time, which is way above average compared to Ice Wolf's other spells. It's a safe way to get good value out of a high pip cost spell. Ice Fortress isn't bad at all. It's a 4 pip 200 AoE shield that also clears a trap on everyone on your team. Ice Colossus's 3 pip AoE shield is obviously much better, but this spell is still a great way to keep your teammates alive. Shatterstorm is awful. It's a 6 pip 200 AoE hit that clears a blade on each opponent for a 200 trap. It's not often that all your opponents are bladed, so more often than not you're just dealing 200 AoE damage for an absurdly high pip cost. You should discard this every single time. Arctic Blast is your better AoE option. It's a 6 pip 225 AoE hit that could deal a whopping 350 AoE damage instead if your team has a minion out. If your teammate casts a minion, then this spell is devastatingly powerful. Otherwise, 225 damage for 6 pips is pretty underwhelming. Overall, don't expect to deal damage with Ice Wolf. It's a form that really stays true to its school, excelling purely in shielding and dealing little to no damage. Unfortunately, a major downside I haven't even touched upon yet is that this form has absolutely 0 stun blocks. Most ice forms do, and its inability to prevent stunning is definitely noticeable when paired up against Stormelf and other stunners. But hey, if you pick and choose your fights by pairing up with minion casters, you can slam your opponents with powerful 2 pip 225 hits repeatedly, and become an unstoppable force. However, that's easier said than done, so your best bet when not paired with a minion is to just ignore your weak hits and spam those 100 shields, which can't last forever. Ice Wolf's clearly one of Beastmoon's weakest forms, and even though it has 600 health, it simply can't take out its opponents, so I toss it in E tier. Life Minnow's a weird form, with relatively low value per pip and some odd utility. It gets overshadowed by other healing forms, but can still heal well and pack a punch when needed. Let's take a look at its spells. Tears of Mourning is Life Minnow's afterlife spell, except instead of reviving upon death like Life Drakes, this spell will cast an AoE mantle upon death, so it won't bring you back, making it one of the worst afterlife spells in the game. It still only costs 0 pips, so it's okay to use if you're trying to build pips, but you really shouldn't prioritize it like Life Drake's afterlife. The Worm Turns is your better 0 pip spell, dealing 50 damage and pushing a damage over time. You can chain this into your Bionome spell, which I'll explain shortly, but yeah, this is a useful condition and a solid way to build pips. Bionomes is a 1 pip 75 hit that casts a 75 heal blade on yourself if your target has a damage over time. This is one of the only heal blades in the entire game, making it a pretty unique conditional effect. This spell was specifically designed to follow up your damage over time push into a decent combo. So if your opponent places a damage over time on you, Caterpillar first into a Gnomes for maximum value. Still, this combo is pretty situational, so most often this spell just deals 75 damage for 1 pip. Propitious Pixie is a 2-pip 300 heal over time that can clear a damage over time for an additional 150 heal over time. So it's another one of Life Minnow's damage over time counters, healing up to 450 overtime value for just 2 pips if you pull the condition off. Even though this value is excellent, the fact that heal overtimes can't actually revive makes this spell pretty bad. Your best healing option is Radiant Boon. It's a 2-pip 150 heal that serves as a solid way to revive an ally. Make sure you stock up on battle cards for this, and if paired with your Bionome's conditional heal blade, you can actually revive for 225 HP, which is pretty great. Rite of Spring is pretty awful. It's a measly 2-pip 100 heal that casts a 300 heal over time if your ally's bladed. Sure, it revives, but for such little value. However, if you cast this on yourself after obtaining your Bionome's conditional heal blade, you get a whopping 475 heal value, which is great for sustaining yourself while taking hits. But this is so situational, since it requires the complex combo of your opponent casting a damage over time on you, you pushing it with your Caterpillar, you casting Bionomes, and then finally following up with this spell. That's a 4-round strat which you most likely will die well beforehand. Metal Mangler is underestimated. Up front, it may not seem like a lot, but it's a 3-pip 150 hit that always tacks on an additional 200 damage over time. Right away, that's 350 value for 3 pips, which is amazing for Life Minnow. But on top of that, if your teammate blades you, the blade counts for both hits, doubling the blade value, and you can combo this into Bionomes for the heal blade. Bull Rush is a 3-pip 225 hit that heals yourself for 100 HP if you have a blade. So with your Bionome's heal blade, this will get you 400 value for 3 pips. That's excellent value, and even without the condition, a 3-pip 225 hit for a medium-sized life form isn't bad at all. Unicorn Blessing is way better in theory than in practice. It's a whopping 4-pip 500 heal over time that throws on a 4-round double pip aura if the opponents have a minion out. When on earth will you ever need a 500 heal over time? Never. So you're much better off using literally anything else, and you should discard the spell every single time, even though the condition pays for itself. Arboreal Vengeance is a 5-pip 200 AoE hit that casts an AoE mantle if your opponents have a minion out. Pretty low damage and a not so great condition. Stick to your single hits and heals. Overall, Life Minnow's an interesting form that's pretty standard across the board. Most of its spells are either just okay or bad, but it is able to revive and hit decently well. When it comes down to it, this form was designed to have tons of combos, for instance the Worm Turns into Bionomes into Rite of Spring. But again, this is all better in theory than in practice, because the odds you'll live long enough to pull off any multiple turn combos is low. You're best off just trying to keep yourself alive with Radiant Boon and using single hits when you can. I'm putting Life Minnow all the way down in E tier. Mythwolf's another one of Beastmoon's weirder forms. With the proper minion setup, it can become an impenetrable wall, and it has some of the best utility in the game, except it can never deal more than 150 single hit damage at once, making it one of the least powerful forms. But with such great utility, its lack of damage output usually doesn't become much of an issue. Let's check out its spells. For 0 pips, Vile Veterinarian pushes a weakness then deals 50 damage. Any push or steal condition for 0 pips is excellent, making this an amazing option whenever your opponent is dumb enough to weakness you. On a similar note, for 0 pips, Trickster's Bite steals a shield, then deals 50 damage. Again, amazing utility for just 0 pips. It's a phenomenal counter against ice forms and any other shielders. Call of the Pack summons a Skullbot minion for 0 pips. This minion has 125 health, and either casts a 0 pip 50 shield or 0 pip shield steal every turn. Unlike most other minions, it won't cast an AoE spell once it reaches a high amount of pips, so these Skullbot minions just sit around at max pips all fight long, which is pretty unfortunate. Also, the AI isn't smart enough to only cast shield steals on shielded enemies, so often this minion will waste turns trying to steal a shield from an unshielded opponent. Still though, its 0 pip 50 shields are great value for a minion, and Skullbot's existence alone is enough to pull off good minion conditions on Mythwolf's other spells, so definitely bust this minion out as soon as you can. For 1 pip, Shake It Off pushes a shield and can clear a weakness for a 100 shield. This is Mythwolf's worst spell, because often it literally does nothing. If you don't have a shield on you to push, or a weakness to clear on whoever you're casting this on, it'll just burn the pip if you try using it. And even if you do have a shield on you, is it really worth pushing a shield for 1 pip? Often the answer is no. This spell's only okay if you could pull off the condition and clear an ally's weakness for a 100 shield. And even then, the value isn't amazing. Feral Tenacity is a 2 pip 150 hit that clears a trap on yourself for a 100 shield on yourself. It's an excellent trap counter, and it's actually Mythwolf's lowest cost, highest damage single target hit, so you'll need to rely a ton on this spell for dealing damage. Make sure you stock up on as many of these battle cards as you can. For the Pack is a strange spell. For 3 pips, it sacrifices a minion to cast a 100 AoE shield and a 2-round AoE double pip aura. So, a decent strategy in a slow-paced fight is to Skullbot on round 1 into this spell on round 2 for AoE 100 shields and double pip auras. And since you get 2 pips back yourself, you can think of this spell as just costing 1 pip. That's pretty great value. But still, a pretty slow setup for a slow reward. For 4 pips, Show of Force deals 150 damage and casts a 200 shield on yourself. That's a total of 350 value for 4 pips. Not bad at all, but again, it would be much more effective if it did a little more damage and a little less shield value, since Mythwolf already lacks offensive power. Also for 4 pips, Strength of the Pack targets your minion for a 200 AoE shield and AoE stun block. Pretty great shield value, and that's right, stun blocks on a myth form. I always joke that KI mixed up this spell with Ice Wolf's Ice Fortress when designing the forms, because stun blocks would belong much better on an ice form, and trap removals would belong better on a myth form. But hey, this just makes Mythwolf more unique. Also, by the time you have 4 pips, you'll usually have your minion out, so casting this shouldn't be much of a problem. Mad Dog deals 200 AoE damage for 5 pips and places a mantle on any opponents that have a damage over time. You'll almost never pull off this condition, meaning this is just a 5 pip 200 AoE hit, which is pretty lame. But not as lame as Doggone Frog, a 6 pip 225 AoE hit that clears a trap on all teammates for a 100 shield. Again, this condition is hard to get any value from, so it ends up just being a 6 pip 225 AoE hit, which is god awful. Overall, if you take a look at the spell list again, you'll see that Mythwolf doesn't really have many spells that stand out as amazing, but it also doesn't have many spells you should instantly discard, so across the board, it's as average as you can get. Only being able to deal 150 single hit damage at a time hurts it a ton though, but fortunately, you could build pips easily and have access to amazing low cost utility. I'd throw it in C tier. Stormcroc's a classic. The one thing you need to know about fighting one, never put it below 50% health. In other words, never leave it at 200 HP or below without fully killing it, or else it's going to unleash some devastating conditional damage on you. It has solid damage per pip and amazing blade value, making it one of the strongest forms in the game damage-wise, but as a medium-sized storm form, it only has 425 health. Let's check out its spells. Kraken's Decree is outstanding. It's currently the only X-pip hit in the game, busting out 100 damage per pip. So if you have 1 pip, it'll deal 100 damage. If you have 2 pips, it'll deal 200 damage. And if for some reason you have 7 pips, it'll deal 700 damage. Of course you'll never be sitting at max pips, but I've seen players unleash this spell at 4 or 5 pips before, insta-killing their opponents. It's insanely powerful. Blistering Bolt is sadly Stormcroc's only option for building pips. It's a 0 pip 50 hit that clears a heal over time. You often won't pull this condition off, but still, you'll need to rely on this spell purely for building pips, so make sure you have a few in your deck. Rallying Blade is a 1 pip 125 blade that also clears a damage over time. This is amazing value, and an excellent condition. Nothing more to say. Serpent's Twist is a 2-pip 200 hit that stuns your target if you have less than 50% health. Again, this means if you have 200 or less health, it'll stun the target. Even without the condition, a 2-pip 200 hit is always amazing. For 2 pips, Twin Blades casts a 125 blade on an ally, and then another one on yourself. That's 250 value for 2 pips in the form of blades. It can't get much better than this. Thresher is yet another 2-pip 200 hit that will deal 300 damage if you have less than 50% health. That's right, when you have 200 or less HP, it's a 2-pip 300 hit. That's incredible. Energetic Golem is a 4-pip 200 AoE hit that gives you back 2 pips if you have less than 50% health. So again, if you have 200 or less health, it's basically a 2-pip 200 AoE hit. Insane. You're probably thinking at some point, Stormcroc needs to have a bad spell. And here it is. For 4 pips, Furious Resolve casts a 100 AoE blade and removes a damage over time from everyone on your team. This value is pretty garbage, so make sure to discard this spell every time it shows up in your hand. Bloodletter isn't much better. It's a sad 4-pip 150 AoE hit that removes a heal over time from all opponents. This damage is grossly underpowered, and the condition isn't great either. Discard it. Lastly, Desperate Daimyo is a 5-pip 250 AoE hit that will deal 350 AoE damage instead if you have less than 50% health. So if you have 200 or less HP, it's a 5-pip 350 AoE hit. That's honestly amazing value, with or without the condition. The problem is, it costs so many pips, and Stormcroc has a really hard time building pips, so often you'll never be able to use this. Overall, Stormcroc decimates opponents. It has the highest number of 2-pip 200 hits in the game, technically having 3 if you count Kraken's Decree. This means you can always dish out 200 damage at 2 pips without digging too hard in your deck, making it an extremely reliable offensive form. It's great at blading allies for AoE hits too, and let's not forget its insane conditional effects when sitting at 200 health or below. Imagine being revived with a pip and immediately casting a 300 Thresher. Again, the only thing holding it back is its semi-low 425 HP, meaning it gets taken out rather quickly without the ability to guarantee stuns on opponents like Stormelf and Stormrat can. I'd place Stormcroc in A tier. Life Colossus is the lightning rod of Beastmoon, redirecting all incoming damage to itself with its signature intercept effect. Unfortunately, it's the worst reviver of all life forms, requiring 3 pips to simply bring a teammate back to life. And its damage per pip is lackluster, but if you chain its intercepts and spam 3-pip heals on yourself, then hopefully your teammates can pick apart the opponents before they destroy you. Oh, it also counters damage over time very well. Let's check out its spells one by one. Benevolent Bat is a 0-pip 50 hit that gives you a pip if you cast it on a minion. So, if your opponent casts a minion, just forget about this spell's damage and treat it as giving yourself a free pip. Kaboom is situational. For 0 pips, it pushes a damage over time and detonates it immediately. So in most cases, it literally does nothing. But when your opponents are dumb enough to cast a damage over time on you, they'll regret it immediately when you throw it back and explode it. Revivify is a 0-pip afterlife that casts an AoE 2-round double pip aura. In other words, if you cast this on yourself and then die, everyone else on your team gets 2 pips. This is fantastic value. It's definitely worth casting on yourself if your intercept is up. Dark Protector is Life Colossus' signature move. It's a 0-pip 2-round intercept, meaning any damage dealt by the opposing team, whether single or AoE damage, will be redirected towards you. So if your teammate is about to die, cast this and they'll survive another 2 rounds guaranteed, as any damage targeting them will be redirected to yourself. The problem is, this spell is so predictable that most players just go straight for Life Colossus at the start of the match, and if your opponents target you first, this spell becomes useless. It's still an extremely useful spell to keep in your hand just in case. For 1 pip, Beastmoon Brownie casts a 150 3-round heal over time, and clears a damage over time for another 75 heal over time. It's pretty good at countering damage over times placed on your allies while keeping them alive. Normally I preach that heal over times are horrible since they don't revive, but since this is Life Colossus's highest value spell, and it only costs 1 pip, it's actually not a bad idea to spam on yourself to keep yourself alive. Infectious Worm is a 2 pip 150 hit that pushes a damage over time. This makes it Life Colossus's 3rd option for countering damage over times placed on yourself. Its damage is only average though. Spirit Spider's a 3 pip 225 hit, and if you use it on a minion, it'll place an afterlife on them that heals everyone on your team 50 HP once that minion dies. That's a long and convoluted way to say it's just a 3 pip 225 hit that heals everyone 50 HP if used on a minion. This condition is weird, and it's certainly not worth wasting 3 pips to kill a minion just to bring back a teammate with 50 HP. So just pretend this condition doesn't exist, and treat it solely as a 3 pip 225 hit. You're way better off casting Reform to bring a teammate back. It's a 3 pip 225 heal. It's too bad this spell costs so many pips, but if you do pull it off, the heal value is honestly pretty good, and any teammates you bring back to life will stay alive at least for another full round after. Make sure you stock up on battle cards for this, as it's your best spell. Spry Satyr stinks. It's a 4 pip 250 AoE heal over time. Please do yourself a favor and discard this every single time. Spider Swarm is a hefty 5 pip 200 AoE hit that tacks on an additional 200 damage over time on any opponent that already has a damage over time on them. It's a weird condition for a Life Colossus AoE hit, and in most cases you won't pull it off. So this spell's really just a 5 pip 200 AoE hit. Not good. Overall, there's really just one thing you need to do as Life Colossus. Spam intercepts and keep healing yourself, whether it's with your pixies or reforms. Do this to stay alive as long as possible, and hopefully your teammates will take out your opponents before they take out you. There's not much else to say about Life Colossus. Expect to die fast, and barely dish out any damage. Oh, and the fact that you start fights without any bonus pips isn't the greatest. I'm placing Life Colossus in D tier. Balance Croc has no reason being so powerful for a medium-sized balance form. It's an absolute nightmare to play against, due to its relatively high HP and 100 damage per pip hits. It can generate pips, bust out 2 pip 200s, and swap shields and traps whenever needed. Let's check out its spells. For 0 pips, Exchange of Fate swaps a ward with your ally and gives them a free pip. More often than not, you'll just see Balance Crocs pipping themselves with this spell, ignoring the swap condition. But yeah, any spell that generates a pip for 0 pips is excellent. Tip the Scales is ridiculously good. For 1 pip, it casts a protected 125 trap on the opponent and gives yourself a 50 shield. That's 175 value in total for just 1 pip. This is shockingly high value for a medium-sized form. In fact, I can't think of another medium-sized form's 1 pip spell in the game that comes even close to this. This spell would be overpowered even on a small form. For 1 pip, Shifting Sands swaps a ward then deals 100 damage. This is great damage for just 1 pip, but be careful never to use this if you're shielded or the opponent's trapped. If you're shielded, it'll give your opponent your shield, and if you're trapped, it'll take their trap and put it on you. For instance, don't follow Tip the Scales with this spell, or you'll just give your opponent your 50 shield. Just be smart. Embiggen is a 2 pip 150 shield that clears a ward for a 3-round 50 blade aura. Again, you'll have to be smart when accounting for this condition. Never cast this on an ally who's shielded or it'll clear it. But hey, if you cast this on an ally with a trap, you end up getting a ton of value. Even without the condition, a 2 pip 150 shield isn't too bad. Deadly Sting is what you'll see Balance Croc using most often. It's Balance Croc's only 2 pip 200 hit that throws on an additional 100 trap if the opponent has any ward. So, if you use Tip the Scales on round 1, followed by Deadly Sting on round 2, you're getting 175 value on round 1, followed by 300 value on round 2. That's an incredibly overpowered and easy to pull off combo that obliterates your opponents. Veteran Beastmoon players may remember that this spell's condition originally gave the caster back 1 pip if the opponent had a ward, but KI changed this pip to a 100 trap in the Spring 2022 balance patch. This original condition was even better, since you could just slam your opponent with back-to-back 200s from getting your pip back. Another reason why the new condition is worse is because it prevents you from casting your 100 damage spider hit the following turn, since you just swap the 100 trap onto yourself. Anyways, this spell is still amazing, and even without the condition, a 2-pip 200 is always excellent. Sand Trap is a 3-pip 225 hit that stuns your opponent if any minion is up on either side. 75 damage per pip makes this hit worse than your other ones, but it's still not a bad option if you have no other hits up. For 3 pips, Mark of Moirae casts a 2-round AoE 50 trap aura on your opponents. I suppose it's alright if you're in Spiral, but more often than not, it just clutters your deck, and you should discard it. Balance Croc has so many better options. And Sorcerer's Portent is not one of them. This spell is atrocious. It's a 4-pip 200 hit that puts a 100 heal absorb on the opponent. Heal absorbs are almost always useless, so you're really just getting 200 value for 4 pips. Why would you ever want to use this when you could bust out 2-pip 200s for half the pip cost? For 4 pips, Grave Imbalance casts a protected 125 AoE trap on all opponents, and a 75 AoE shield on everyone on your team. Pretty solid value, and not a bad way to keep your teammates alive while increasing the damage your opponents take. I like it. But if you're looking to use an AoE, Tide of Doom is even better. It's a simple 5-pip 250 AoE hit. Good value and not hard to pull off, since you can pip yourself to build up for it. Never a bad idea to use this. Overall, Balance Croc is truly a force to be reckoned with. The fact that it has so many high value, low pip cost spells means it never needs to waste a turn. It'll almost always cast something useful. Again, 475 HP with 100 damage per pip is downright diabolical. A good strat I mentioned earlier is to cast Tip the Scales on round 1, followed by Deadly Sting on round 2. That's a 2-round 475 value combo. Insane. Or you could just 200 right off the bat. Your call. I'm putting Balance Croc in A tier where it belongs. Life Elf's basically a meme at this point. I mean, the form has a Beguile minion spell, which in itself feels like a fever dream. I don't think I've ever seen a single soul use this before. But yeah, Life Elf's inability to deal single hit damage for more than just 100 at a time puts it way under the curve of usability in competitive play. Sure, it has a 200 HP heal, which is excellent for reviving, but besides that and its Spinning Squirrel AoE hit, which I'll cover shortly, it really doesn't have much else going on for it. Let's take a look. For 0 pips, Life Force Overflow deals 50 damage and detonates a damage over time if the opponent has a weakness, which is awful because Life Elf can't cast weaknesses, and the biggest damage over time you can cast beforehand is just 200 damage. So yeah, this is just a 0 pip 50 hit, pretty bad for a small form, but hey, you need to build pips somehow, and trust me, this is the better of your 2 0 pip options. Because your other option is Elvish Enchantment, which for 0 pips casts a 2-round Beguile that only works on a minion. This means you literally can't cast this if your opponents don't have a minion up, which is almost always. So it's nothing but deck clutter, and even on the rare chance your opponents have a minion up, beguiling it for 2 rounds won't get you much value. So please do yourself a favor and discard this every time. But hey, if anyone ever beguiles the Myth Colossus' Egg Minion's AoE spell, clip it and send it my way. I'd love to see that. Big Bad Butterfly is pretty good actually. For 1 pip, you deal 100 damage and push a damage over time. Great condition with 100 damage per pip. Can't ask for more. The only glaring problem is that this is quite literally the strongest single hit you have, which is pretty pathetic. It's still a great spell though, no complaints. For 1 pip, Poison Pig casts a 200 damage over time on your opponent, along with an additional 50 damage if your opponent has a minion up. This spell's alright. It's super strong on myth forms, since every tick, including the conditional damage, will get an added 25 boost, but otherwise, it's pretty average. For 2 pips, Happy Healers casts a 300 heal over time, and can also cast a 100 direct heal if the opponents have a minion up. You should only use this to revive an ally if the opponents have a minion up, which isn't often. And keep in mind, it won't revive at all without the condition, so just go ahead and discard this to be safe. Healing Hand is great. It's a 2-pip 200 heal that throws on an additional 100 heal over time if you're bladed. Forget about the condition. Any 2-pip 200 heal is excellent. For 3 pips, Vitality Surge casts a 4-round double pip aura and extends a heal over time's duration by 2 rounds. This duration extension effect is pretty unique in Beastmoon, but that doesn't mean it's good. So ignore this, and just treat the spell as a 3-pip 4-pip donation, which isn't bad at all, but the fact that it's not all at once makes it less useful. Also for 3 pips, Reinvigorate casts a 300 heal over time, as well as a 100 blade. Heal over times just aren't useful in Beastmoon, and even though the 100 blade is nice, it's not really worth 3 pips to cast. I suppose it's not a bad option to cast on yourself round 1 to sustain yourself and pop off blade value with a 200 Caterpillar on round 2, but this is risky since your opponents can just take you out on the first turn before you get a chance to follow up with a hit. For 4 pips, Spinning Squirrel deals 200 AoE damage and gives you a pip back for every opponent that has a damage over time. So hey, if you're in Spiral and all 4 opponents have a damage over time on them, then you get to cast this AoE spell for 0 pips. But don't get too excited, the odds of that happening are extremely low. Condition aside, a 4-pip 200 AoE hit for a small lifeform is actually extremely powerful, and a wonderful option to bust out as early as round 2. Lastly, Forest Fury is Life Elf's worst AoE option. For 5 pips, you're casting a 225 AoE damage over time, and it'll cast an additional 100 damage to all enemies if your opponents have a minion up. This AoE hit just isn't good at all, and certainly not worth 5 pips. Discard it every time. Overall, Life Elf is god-awful. Sure, you can revive and bust out a 200 AoE on round 2, but that's it. Otherwise, you're just dealing literally no more than 100 damage at a time. And let's be honest, as a small life form, you'll be targeted and killed immediately anyway. At least Life Fairy has a 3-pip 200 and 225 hit. Congratulations to Life Elf for being my first form to place an F tier. Wow, I swear I didn't rig this randomly generated order of forms. Balance Fairy easily may just be the second and only other form I place in F tier, and it's right after my analysis of Life Elf. Can't make this up. But hey, let's not jump to conclusions just yet. Balance Fairy is one of the only 2 forms that starts a fight with 4 pips, and it gets access to this monstrosity of a hit, so maybe it isn't so bad. Let's look at each of its spells one by one. For 0 pips, Provoke deals 50 damage and detonates a damage over time. Pretty weak damage for a small form, but if paired with a heavy damage over time caster like Fire Elf, you can get a lot of value from the detonate. Your better option for building pips is to cast Accelerate, which costs 0 pips to donate a pip and activate a heal over time. If casted on yourself, this is an excellent way to rapidly generate pips for your massive 7-pip hit, but more on that later. Energize is a great spell. For 1 pip, it heals an ally 50 HP and gives a pip. Just in general, this is pretty good value, but when you realize you can revive a dead teammate and start them off the following turn with 2 pips, it becomes even better. To get the best value from this revive, just as I mentioned during my analysis of Life Cyclops, make sure you as Balance Fairy are in 2nd position and your dead teammate is in 1st position. Then cast this revive on the turn when the opponents go first. This way, your revived teammate will start the next round with 2 pips and be able to use them before the opponents get a chance to hit. This strategy works wonders. For 1 pip, Swindler deals 75 damage and swaps in overtime with the opponent. Just like with any other swap condition, you need to be smart. For instance, on round 1, if you put a damage over time on the opponent, then follow up with this spell on round 2, you'll just steal that damage over time back. Don't do that. The times you should use this spell are when there's a heal over time on the opponent you can steal, or when there's a damage over time on you that you could push. So when you play this card right, it's really useful. But you could use it to your own detriment, and 75 damage per pip on a small form isn't great. Also for 1 pip, Power Conversion casts a 4-round Empowerment aura that gives you a pip back for incoming rank 3 and up spells. This spell is disgustingly bad. Let's say you're dumb enough to cast this on yourself. How many rank 3 spells do you expect to tank before dying? If you're lucky, you'll get hit with 1 rank 3 spell and stay alive, getting your singular pip back for a net 0 gain. But more often, the opponents just won't cast a high pip cost spell, or you'll straight up die from it if they do. I suppose if you cast this aura on an Ice Colossus with 600 HP, then maybe they'll be able to tank 2 rank 3 spells to get an extra bang for your buck, but please just do yourself a favor and discard this every time. For 2 pips, Reconstruct casts a protected 200 heal over time, and can clear a damage over time for an extra 150 heal over time. The value here is awful, even for an already useless heal over time, especially for a small form. It's only good for clearing damage over times on allies, because if you have a damage over time on yourself, you're better off just pushing it with Swindler. For 2 pips, Shamanic Pact casts a 200 damage over time on the opponent, and a protected 150 heal over time on yourself. That's 350 value for 2 pips. Not bad at all. Sure, the damage over time is slow, but you can follow it up immediately with Provoke to detonate it, or you could follow it up with an Accelerate on yourself to activate the heal over time. So you have plenty of cool combos, but just don't follow this up with a Swindler, or you'll steal back that damage over time. Innervation costs 3 pips to donate 3 pips, and swaps in overtime. It's a solid last resort to give your teammate a ton of pips right before you die. Invigorate is a 4 pip 5-round double pip aura. It takes a while getting all the value from this aura, but you do end up getting 1 more pip than you bargained for, so it's not bad. Plus, if your teammate has 2 pip 200s, you can cast this aura on them round 1, allowing them to spam them. Lastly, Ravaging Sun is Balance Fairy's signature max pip spell. For a hefty 7 pips, you're dealing 525 damage. If you don't count Stormcroc's X-Pip Triton, this is the highest damage spell in the entire game. Even though it's only 75 damage per pip, which is terrible for a small form, if you pip yourself, you can unleash it as early as round 3. It one-shots most forms, which is incredible. Make sure you aim whichever opponent has the highest health to ensure you get the most value from it. All in all, Balance Fairy is really just a pip donator. You should pair it with forms that have strong AoEs to pip them up and deal massive damage to your opponents. On its own though, Balance Fairy struggles at dealing fast damage, but if left alive long enough, you can decimate your opponents with this beast of a spell. And fortunately, you're equipped with a revive spell, but this often just makes your opponents target and kill you first. And with such low health, getting killed fast is an understatement. You usually won't make it past round 1. Overall, I don't think it's fair to say Balance Fairy is the single worst form in the game, which a lot of players seem to think it is. But don't get me wrong, it's still pretty god-awful. I'd throw it in E tier. Balance Cyclops is the slowest form in the game. It's one of only 3 forms that doesn't have bonus pips, but don't let this fool you. Your deck comes with tons of blades, shields, and high damage hits, so if you have enough time to build up pips, you can surprise your opponents with some devastating damage. And you're the only form in the game with a global spell, which I'll explain in a moment. Let's check out its spells. Tide of Battle is the only global spell in Beastmoon, as of the time I'm making this video at least. It costs 0 pips to cast, and it gives everyone on both sides double pips for the rest of the entire fight. Since there's no other global spells, it's impossible to replace this, so once it's up for good. Your main strategy for using the spell is to only cast it when you outnumber your opponents in a fight. So let's say you're in a 2v2, and on round 1 you take out an opponent. Now that it's a 2v1, it's a perfect time to use this global spell. On the other hand, never use this when you're outnumbered 1v2. But yeah, this is a super unique and beneficial spell that allows Balance Cyclops to follow up with high pip cost hits. Spiked Buckler is such a great spell for a large form. For 0 pips, it casts both a protected 75 shield and a 50 blade. That's 125 value for 0 pips. No other large form in the game has a 0 pip spell with such high value. It's a phenomenal way to build up pips while keeping yourself or an ally protected. For 1 pip, Thieving Beetle swaps a ward, then deals 75 damage. Just like any other swap condition, you need to be smart. Never accidentally steal a trap or push a shield. Instead, you obviously want to use this to steal a shield or push a trap. And 75 damage per pip on a large form isn't bad at all. For 2 pips, Feedback Loop swaps in overtime with an ally and donates 2 pips. So yeah, it's alright. Nothing more to say. For 2 pips, Spiked Shield casts a protected 100 shield and a 100 blade. That's 200 value for 2 pips, which is awesome, especially for a large form. But if you compare it to the overpowered 0 pip 125 value Spiked Buckler, it's not as good. Still though, it's a solid way to protect a teammate and give them a little extra firepower. For 3 pips, Reinforce swaps a ward with an ally and slaps a massive protected 300 shield on them. Again, 100 value per pip is solid for a large form, and if you could keep your teammate alive with this, it becomes an absolute game changer. Colossal Scorpion may appear weak, but if used the right way, it's excellent. It's a standard 3 pip 125 AoE hit. On its own, it's obviously not great, but keep in mind Balance Cyclops has a few spells that give blades, so a great strat while your opponents aren't targeting you is just to blade yourself up and bust this out, dealing a decent amount of AoE damage for such a low pip cost. Pretty sneaky. For 4 pips, Curse Eater slams your opponent with 300 damage, and can clear a damage over time on yourself for a 200 heal over time. So if you pull this condition off, that's 500 plus value, which is insane. And even without the condition, let's say you casted your bubble, so you're quickly gaining pips. Then it becomes real easy to bust this out for some big single hit damage. Stunning Swarm is your worst 4 pip hitting option. It only deals 225 damage with a stun. Stunning at high pip costs isn't as effective as low pip cost stunning, since you can't stun chain your opponents. So yeah, this deals around 56 damage per pip, which is not great at all. If you're at 4 pips, you're better off casting Curse Eater to take out your opponent. Phalanx is a classic Beastmoon spell, mostly known for its role in Beastmoon Mayhem as an outside spiral fight spell. But in Beastmoon Hunt, it costs 6 pips for a protected 150 AoE shield and a 150 AoE blade. Honestly, the value here is excellent, but the pip cost is just so high that you'll almost always want to discard it because it'll clutter your deck. You'll really only ever cast this in a super slow paced fight after casting your double pip bubble. Overall, Balance Cyclops has a deck packed with blades, shields, and pips. Its ward swapping mechanic makes it a threat to ice forms, as well as any form that traps. Strategy-wise, your best bet is to spam Spiked Bucklers on yourself and allies to build pips, and unleash your AoE whenever possible. Hopefully, that'll be enough to kill at least one opponent along with your teammates' hits. Then, once you take out one opponent, put up a double pip bubble and save for your bigger hits. Don't forget to throw down your 300 shield whenever needed. It can come in very clutch. I'd place Balance Cyclops in B tier, because even though it has great value in its spells, it's still extremely slow, especially with 0 bonus pips. Deathdrake is the proud owner of one of the biggest memes in the Beastmoon community, Needful Things. I'll talk about it in a moment, but for now, let me just say that Deathdrake isn't great. It has decent value in plenty of its spells, but not in the form of direct damage, so in a fast-paced game like Beastmoon, it's really bad at taking out its opponents quickly. Other medium-sized death forms like Deathcroc and Deathpig get 2-pip 200s, but Deathdrake's 2-pip 200 is in the form of a drain, so the damage is halved. Still though, it has some great utility, including its hilarious signature deck cluttering mechanic. Let's break down each spell one by one. Sudden Death is a 0-pip 75 trap that detonates the damage over time if you have a shield. So you need to be paired with a shielder for this condition to work, since you can't cast shields on your own. But regardless, 75 trap value for 0 pips isn't bad at all, and it'll double if used on a drain. Alright, I can't avoid talking about this any longer. Take a look at Needful Things. It's a 0-pip spell that puts 4 cards into your opponent's deck. What cards, you ask? Cost of Life, a 0-pip 100 heal over time that can only be used on yourself. And the real kicker is, you can't discard it. See the lock icon? So the point of this spell is to clutter your opponent's already small hands with garbage they can't right-click and get rid of. And it's hilarious when used effectively. The most effective way to use this spell is to spam it on the lowest threat on the opposing team. So if the opposing team has like an Ice Wolf, use it on them. Since Death Drake gets up to 4 Needful Things cards in its deck, you could fill your opponent's deck with 16 pixies, and then sit and laugh as they struggle to pull any spells at all, basically stun chaining them as they're hopelessly forced to cast heal overtimes one after another on themselves. And the best part is that you can pull off nasty combos with your conditions on other spells. But hey, this only works in a slow-paced fight. In reality, the sad ironic truth is that this spell itself clutters your own deck in a fast-paced fight because it's completely useless. It doesn't get much more ironic than that. Inhibit is excellent. It's a 0-pip 75 weakness that steals a blade. That's awesome value for no pips at all. It's honestly your best 0-pip spell and works wonders against storm forms. For 1 pip, Miraculous Recovery casts a 100 heal trap and steals a heal over time. It's only useful if you casted Needful Things on your opponent and they're spamming pixies on themselves. Otherwise, just discard it. Malady is a 1 pip 150 damage over time that clears a heal over time for another 75 damage over time. Again, you get the best value from this after Needful Thinging your opponent while they're locked in a pixie spam, but even on its own, it's not too bad. Spirit Thief is Death Drake's only drain. It's a 2 pip 100 drain, so that's 200 value for 2 pips when you get the full heal value, which isn't bad at all. Plus, as I mentioned, you could 0-pip 75 trap into this for 350 total value, which is pretty excellent. Not a bad way to dish out damage while keeping yourself alive. Dark Animism is a 3-pip 200 hit that gives yourself a 3-round double pip aura if you have a blade. So it's an amazing follow-up if you steal a blade with Inhibit. In that scenario, you're getting all 3 pips back, so the spell pays for itself. But in most cases, it's just a 3-pip 200 hit, which is pretty low value. Still though, you can bust this out on round 2 of a fight for good damage. Creeping Death is a massive 4-pip 500 damage over time. High value, but high pip cost, and super slow damage. You should discard this spell every time, unless you're paired with an ice form that could shield you for a follow-up detonate condition. Terminal Illness is a 5-pip 300 AoE damage over time that clears a heal over time on each opponent for an additional 200 damage over time. You won't often get full condition value from this AoE, so on its own, it's pretty bad. Fun fact, this spell was once responsible for a hilarious glitch I covered in another video. The glitch is now patched, but it was still pretty interesting, so you should check it out. Lastly, Relentless Attack is a 5-pip 250 AoE hit that throws a 100 heal trap on any opponent that's already trapped. The condition stinks, but on its own, 250 AoE value for 5 pips is pretty good. Overall, Death Drake fails at dishing out quick damage on its opponents, which is very unfortunate in a fast-paced game. However, it excels in slow fights, where it can hilariously clutter opponents' decks and lock them in pixie chains while it pops off heal over time conditionals. It's a good form if you want to maximize playtime too, since you'll never be targeted first, but that's only because you're not really a threat, so that's not exactly a good thing. In a fast-paced fight, trap on round 1 and 200 on round 2 for maximum damage, but otherwise, just have fun. Build up pips and pull off creative plays. Maybe save for that good AoE. I'd place Death Drake in D tier. Storm Colossus is a monster. It's a bulky powerhouse that can quickly turn the tables of a fight with its taunting. Great damage per pip, amazing conditions, and access to stunning only makes it even more powerful. It's useful in almost any situation, and you should always aim for it first, or you'll find yourself in deep trouble. Let's check out its spells. Electrify is a 0-pip 50 blade that clears a damage over time. Same as Stormwolf's, not bad at all. Sound and Fury is a 0 pip 2 round taunt. It's amazing for such a high HP form, and you should always bust this out on round 1 if your teammates are playing smaller forms. Neural Shock is a 1 pip stun that can deal an additional 50 damage if the opponent's trapped. You'll probably never pull this condition off, but that doesn't matter. It's basically the same spell as Stormrat's Stun, and Stormrat's a small form, so having access to a spell like this as a large form is incredible. Gathering Storm's insane. It's a 2 pip 200 blade that can clear a weakness for another 100 blade. It's similar to Stormwolf's 2 pip blade, but slightly worse because the condition is harder to pull off. Still though, 100 value per pip on a large form is wild, and the fact you could drop this on your teammate on round 1 basically makes it as good as a 2 pip 200 hit. Elven Bolt is a 2 pip 150 hit that throws on a Dispel if your health is at less than 50%. This means if you have 250 or less HP, it'll dispel the enemy, making this a pretty easy condition to pull off, considering you'll be taking damage while you're taunted. I love this one. System Shock is basically the same as Elven Bolt, but slightly worse, because instead of dispelling the enemy for its conditional effect, it'll stun the enemy. Still a great spell though, but when given the option, go for Elven Bolt instead. Chaotic Currents is a 3 pip 225 hit that casts a 150 heal over time on yourself if you have less than 50% health. So again, if you have 250 HP or less, you'll pull this condition off, totaling 375 value for 3 pips. That's awesome. And you'll pull this condition off almost every single time, since you're always taking damage while you're taunted. Snap, Crack, and Pop is a 3 pip 300 hit. Just like its other hits, we're looking at 75 damage per pip, which isn't bad at all on a large form. If you make it to 4 pips, definitely slam an opponent with this. Superstorm is a 5 pip 250 AoE hit that will deal 350 AoE damage instead if you have a heal over time. You'll probably never pull this condition off, since the only heal over time you can cast on yourself costs 3 pips, so you won't be able to combo off it. But hey, 250 AoE damage for 5 pips on its own is not bad at all for a large form. Ferrous Tyrant is another 5 pip 250 AoE hit that'll stun opponents if you have below 50% health. So if you're sitting at 250 HP or below, which you most likely will be if you're at 5 pips, you'll pull this condition off, stunning all opponents. Pretty sweet value for a large form, along with an almost always guaranteed condition. Overall, Storm Colossus is rock solid. See what I did there? When playing it, make sure to cast Taunt on round 1 to protect your teammates. Or if you could take out an opponent immediately, just 200 blade your teammate on round 1 instead for the kill. Then go crazy giving your opponents a headache while stun chaining and taunting again and again. Storm Colossus doesn't have a single bad spell in its entire deck. You really don't have to discard anything, except maybe some AoEs to make space for other cards. As for its placement on the tier list, because it can taunt, 200 blade, stun chain, and pull off amazing conditional effects, I'm throwing it up at the top in S tier. Myth Fairy's a sleeper form. It may not look like much of a threat, but it's one of the only forms in the game with a 4 pip 250 AoE hit, which is disgustingly good. The fact that you can bust this out as early as round 2, just like Mythrat and Stormelf can, makes Myth Fairy a huge threat that should be targeted right away. However, unlike Mythrat and Stormelf, it doesn't have a 2 pip 250 hit and generally dishes out damage a lot slower. Let's take a look at its spells. Clangorous Banshee is a 0 pip 75 hit that detonates a damage over time. It's not bad at all. Also for 0 pips, Mischievous Imp pushes a weakness, then deals 75 damage. Again, not bad at all. In my opinion, this condition is slightly better than the detonate effect on your Banshee spell. This is a good spell to cast on round 1, to follow up with your 250 AoE hit on round 2. Summon Thrall is an interesting spell. For 0 pips, it summons a Cinder Thrall minion. This minion has 100 HP and casts a 0 pip 75 damage over time every single round. It's honestly not that bad on its own, but here's the real kicker. If you already summon this minion and you summon Thrall again, it'll upgrade your Cinder Thrall minion to an Ember Thrall minion. This minion upgrade is an extremely unique mechanic that only belongs to Myth Fairy. The Ember Thrall minion has 150 HP and takes turns casting a 0-pip 75 damage over time, then a 2-pip 200 AoE damage over time, over and over again. This damage is outright insane coming from a minion. However, it takes 2 full rounds of setup, which you often won't survive long enough for. Plus, on the turn you upgrade your minion, it won't be able to use a hit. So honestly, I recommend just casting your minion once for your other spell's minion conditions, if at all, and not worrying about upgrading it. Bad Kitty is a 1-pip 125 hit that will deal 200 damage instead if your opponent's taunted. It's pretty rare to see a taunt counter in Beastmoon, and it can definitely come in clutch considering taunting has become so prevalent in competitive play lately. Fabled Centaur is another 1-pip 125 hit that throws on a 75 trap if the opponent has a damage over time, so it's the perfect spell to spam when your minion's out, since your minion will cast a damage over time every single turn. And the best part is, this trap gets used immediately before the opponent has a chance to clear or push it, since the damage over time on them will use it right away. Stoke the Ember is a 1-pip afterlife you put on yourself that dishes out 125 AoE damage once you die. The thing is, it requires a minion to target, meaning your minion must be up. But hey, if your minion is up, then definitely use this. It's much better than Mythdrake's Protraction spell, because this time the afterlife gets placed on yourself instead of on your minion. Beneficence is a 2-pip 2-pip dono, and clears a weakness for another pip for yourself. It's a pretty good idea to pip your teammate with this if you're about to die. Ember Legends is a 3-pip 200 AoE trap that requires targeting your minion. This means your minion must be up, so you can't cast this on round 1. But if you do summon a minion, you definitely want to cast this since the value is fantastic. The next spell is insanely overpowered, and the sole reason why Myth Fairy is such a major threat. For 2 pips, you're dishing out 250 AoE damage, which is insane, and it doesn't end there. You're also throwing a 125 trap on any opponent that has a damage over time. So if your minion's up, you're pulling this condition on at least one opponent guaranteed. You should stock up on battle cards for this AoE, so you can ensure you use it on round 2 every single fight. It's amazing. Lastly, Bad Doggy is a bulky 6-pip AoE spell that first clears a weakness on everyone on your team and then deals 325 damage to all enemies. This is honestly incredible value, and it's especially useful when your opponent puts a weakness on you, but its pip cost is just too high to be useful. You're way better off sticking to your 4-pip AoE hit instead, so just discard this every time. Overall, Myth Fairy has a lot of tricks up its sleeve. The main strat you should go for every single time is 0-pip 75 hit on round 1, followed by a whopping 250 AoE hit on round 2. This is on par with S-tier forms like Mythrat and Stormelf, and it absolutely destroys your opponents. If you find yourself in a slower paced fight where you won't die immediately, then cast your minion once without upgrading it, and follow up with your AoE trap and other minion conditions. Never bother upgrading your minion, and don't bother saving up for your 6-pip AoE. And if you really don't think you'll make it past round 1 at all, just donate 2 pips to your teammate. The main reason why Myth Fairy isn't an S tier with Mythrat and Stormelf is because it doesn't have a 2-pip 250 hit that it can cast on round 1. This honestly really hurts the form, so much in fact that I drop it all the way down to C tier. Mythpig's weird. Sure, it has a 2-pip 200, which is really all you need, but unfortunately it also has a bunch of trash that ends up cluttering its deck. And it's terrible at building pips too, since one of its 2 0-pip spells is downright awful, and the other one summons a minion, which you can really only cast once per fight. So don't plan on using any high pip cost spells. Let's check out its spells one by one. For 0 pips, Surprise Attack pushes a trap and detonates a damage over time. So the best case scenario for using this spell is when you have a trap on yourself and the opponent has a damage over time on them. But these are both infrequent conditions that you can't control yourself, so most often this spell simply won't do anything at all. You should just discard it, which is a shame since you won't be able to build pips with it. Your other 0-pip spell is Summon Sannybot, which summons a minion. This Sannybot minion has 100 HP and casts a puny 0 pip 25 trap every round until it reaches 4 pips and casts a still puny 4 pip 25 AoE trap. Normally, minions' AoE spells have increased value, so I'm not sure why this minion's AoE traps still do a measly 25. But like most other minions, the minion's existence itself matters more than its actual spells, since once you summon it, you can follow up with minion conditions on your other spells. Again, one glaring issue is that after you summon your minion once, this card becomes useless unless it dies for some reason. So again, you really can't build pips with this spell either. Ninja Strike is a 1 pip 100 hit. It's as simple as that. Great value. Retaliation is a 2 pip 100 hit that can clear a weakness on yourself for 200 damage instead. So you should really only use this if you have a weakness on yourself. Otherwise, it's a sad 50 damage per pip, which is god awful on a medium-sized form. I would just discard this. Poison Dart is excellent. It's a 2 pip 200 hit that throws on an extra 100 trap if you're shielded. So pair yourself up with an ice form and you can get 300 value for 2 pips. And even without the condition, a 2 pip 200 is always amazing. Pip Pip Hooray costs 3 pips to remove a trap and donate a pip to everyone on your team. But it targets a minion, so it requires you to summon one beforehand. I personally don't think this is worth it at all, unless your team was just AoE trapped, which is very rare. You're much better off discarding this and focusing on using your hits instead. On the other hand, Rush of Combat is great. It's a 3 pip 200 hit that gives yourself a 2-round double pip aura if you have a minion out. So if you follow a minion summon with this, you'll get 2 pips back, which basically pays for itself. Fortune Reversal steals a shield and deals 150 damage for 3 pips. I don't like when a push, swap, or steal mechanic is at such a high pip cost. It's way more effective in a small hit where you can bust it out whenever. And 50 damage per pip isn't good at all. Compare this to Mythminnow's Rustbat or Mythwolf's Trickster's Bite. It's so much worse. Ninja Fury is a 4 pip hit that has a mechanic unique to Mythpig, Damage Division. This means you can choose whether it does 300 damage to 1 target, 150 damage to 2 targets, 100 damage to 3 targets, or 75 damage to 4 targets. This damage per pip is revolting. If you choose all 4 targets in Spiral, this means this spell's a 4 pip 75 AoE hit. That's unfathomably bad. It's really only okay as a single hit, dealing 300 damage for 4 pips, which still isn't even that good. And the problem is that Mythpig has trouble building pips in the first place, so you won't even have many opportunities to use this spell. I would just discard this. Lastly, Soul Scourge sacrifices a minion for 5 pips, then deals 250 AoE damage and throws on a 100 AoE trap if you're shielded. So this does require a minion to be up, but if you're ever sitting on 5 pips as Mythpig, then you definitely already have a minion out and ready to be sacrificed. And I'm not gonna lie, this is still pretty decent AoE damage without the condition. But if you're paired with an ice form, you could pull this condition off for some great extra value. Overall, there's really only 2 strats you should be using as Mythpig. If you're gonna die immediately in a fast-paced fight, then just 200 on round 1, followed by 100s every round until you die, to maximize your damage output. But if you think you'll stay alive at least a few rounds, then minion round 1 into Rush of Combat round 2 into a 2 pip 200 spam. This way, you literally get to pull off a 200 hit on rounds 2, 3, and 4. And since your minion is 25 trapping each round, you're basically busting out 225 damage for 3 consecutive turns. That's incredibly high value, and a solid strat for winning your fight. However, besides these 2 strats, Mythpig's not really good for anything else. In fact, most of the other cards in your deck you should just discard. I'd place Mythpig in B tier. Fire Drake's a solid offensive form with an amazing minion and a unique mechanic that benefits staying above 50% health. It's also solid at building pips. Let's take a look at its spells. Sizzlemander Slap is a 0 pip 75 damage over time that extends a heal over time's duration on yourself by 1 round. This isn't a really useful effect, but the damage itself is not bad for no pips. Reptile Incursion is a 0 pip 50 hit that summons a minion if the opponent has a damage over time. This minion is insane. It only has 50 health, but it casts a 1-round taunt every single round. So once it's summoned, it's perpetually taunted forcing your opponents to kill it before they could target you again. And it's super easy to summon too, since Fire Drake has a ton of damage over time spells to trigger it. It's interesting how other fire forms like Fire Pig and Fire Colossus have awful minions but rely on them solely for minion conditions, whereas Fire Drake has no minion conditions but just a really good minion. Anyways, you definitely want to try to summon it when you can. Kraken Embers is a 1-pip 100 hit, but if your opponent has a shield, it'll clear it first and give yourself a 150 heal over time. This is a fantastic spell. It's an amazing shield counter, and even without the condition, a 1-pip 100 is great. Slow Burn's a 1-pip 150 damage over time that puts an afterlife on the enemy, so that once the enemy dies, your team gets a small 75 AoE heal over time. This isn't a great afterlife effect, but for just 1 pip, honestly it's a lot of value altogether. Mr. Blast Furnace is a 2-pip 225 damage over time that clears an opponent's shield for a mantle. It's pretty amazing at countering shields, but without the condition, it's just okay. Fireman's Charge is Fire Drake's best spell, a 2-pip 200 hit that clears a trap on yourself for a 150 damage over time. It's nice that Fire Drake has the ability to counter traps, but let's be real, you should really just ignore this condition and bust this out on round 1 since it's a 2-pip 200. Smog is awful. It's a horrendous 3-pip AoE mantle that also extends the duration of a heal over time on everyone on your team. This is not worth 3 pips. I don't even know if it would be worth 2 pips. Discard it immediately. Blistering Wyvern is such a cool spell. It's a massive 4-pip 450 damage over time that'll detonate immediately if you have more than 50% health. So if you have 225 HP or more, this is straight up a 4-pip 450 hit. That's insane value. So if you could tell early on in a fight that you won't be targeted, then absolutely build some pips and drop this 450 bomb. Dragon Scald is a 5-pip 300 AoE damage over time with the same condition as Blistering Wyvern. So if you have over 50% health, which means 225 health or more, all the damage over time will detonate immediately, meaning it's a straight up 5-pip 300 AoE hit. This is pretty amazing value when it's detonated immediately, but if you're under 50% HP, it's not the greatest. Skyfire's a 5-pip 250 AoE hit that additionally activates a heal over time on everyone on your team. The damage is solid, making this a way safer AoE to keep in your hand than Dragon Scald, which becomes a lot worse if you're under half health. Overall, Fire Drake has some really high damage per pip spells, except unlike Fire Pig and Fire Minnow, the other 2 medium-sized fire forms with 2 2-pip 200s, Fire Drake only gets 1 2-pip 200, so it's harder to pull it on round 1. In some cases, that's not a problem though, because you could just save up for your 4-pip 450 hit if you're not being targeted. And again, never be afraid to throw a damage over time on an opponent and follow it up with your minion summon, because that Jeering Worm minion is extremely helpful by distracting opponents with taunts. The issue with Fire Drake is when you're targeted first in a fast-paced fight. If you don't pull your 2-pip 200 on round 1, then you're pretty much useless because you won't be able to pull off detonate conditions or even survive long enough to cast them. I'd place Fire Drake in B tier. Deathrat's the epitome of a one-trick pony. It's only good for one thing, and that's AoE trapping on round 1, followed by ghoul spams. If you do this one strategy, you'll hopefully be able to get some real nice damage on your opponents while sustaining yourself with your drains. Do anything else and you're worthless. Seriously, Deathrat has some really atrocious spells for a small form. It almost seems like the developers thought they were designing a medium or large-sized form when making most of its spells. Anyway, let's check him out. Corruption is a 0-pip 75 heal absorb. Discard this every single time. It couldn't be more useless. Backstab costs 0 pips to steal a blade, then deal 50 damage. Honestly, this condition is super clutch whenever your opponent blades, and could give you some insanely high value for no pips at all, but in most cases, it's just a 0-pip 50 hit. Contamination is a 1-pip 100 hit that clears a heal over time for a 75 damage over time. If this spell was on a medium-sized form or large form, it would be excellent, but 100 damage per pip on a small form just isn't as exciting. In a similar sense, Wayne's a 1 pip 100 weakness that's just not good enough for a small form. I mean, Death Pig, a medium-sized form, has the same spell, but with an added condition. So what's going on over here? Not sure why this isn't at least a 125 weakness. Finally, we have Life Taker, which is Deathrat's first spell that's actually good for a small form. It's a 1 pip 75 drain, meaning you get 150 value for just 1 pip if you're getting all the health from it. That's really impressive value. Cheap Shot is god-awful. It's a 2 pip 200 damage over time that throws on a 75 trap if the opponent has a weakness. This looks like something Death Cyclops, a large form, would have. No idea why it was designed with such low damage per pip. I mean, just compare this to Death Fairy and other small forms' damage over time. Not even close. Ambush is Deathrat's best spell by far. It's a whopping 3 pip 200 AoE trap that'll also cast a 50 AoE weakness if you're shielded, so pair yourself with an ice form for even more value. But the condition doesn't even matter, since using this immediately on round 1 is a legendary move that'll start your team off with a huge advantage. And don't forget that your drains will double the value of each trap. Definitely stock up on battle cards for this. Plunder looks good in theory, but is actually bad in practice. For 3 pips, you steal all blades from an opponent, then deal 100 damage. So if your opponent's ever blade stacking against you, the value you get from casting this is astronomical. But keep dreaming, because nobody's dumb enough to blade stack against a Deathrat, and you'll probably be dead before an opportunity like this even arises. So discard this every time, because without the condition, the damage per pip is disgustingly low. Miasma's a 4 pip 100 AoE weakness that'll also steal a blade from every opponent. Again, the value is just so low for a small form. I suppose if the opponent's AoE blade, then this is pretty good, but in most cases, you should just immediately discard this. Lastly, Thousand Cuts is identical to Death Fairy's 5 pip AoE. It's a 5 pip 300 AoE damage over time that casts an additional 125 AoE trap if you're bladed. I'm not sure why it's exactly the same as Death Fairy's, but hey, it's not too bad. I still wouldn't prioritize using this though, since your AoE trap is just infinitely better. Overall, Deathrat's design is questionable. I can't emphasize enough that your only strategy should literally just be casting your AoE trap on round 1, and then draining every single round after that until you die. For that reason, and this sounds really strange, but Deathrat's the only form I recommend keeping at tier 1, since that optimizes the chance of pulling your AoE traps and ghouls when needed. The more you tier it, the worse it gets. But anyway, just stock up on battle cards for AoE traps and ghouls, and don't use anything else. Unfortunately, your deck comes with so much clutter, and if you don't pull the right cards at the right times, then you're useless. So I'm placing Deathrat all the way in D tier. Fire Cyclops is a wildly unpopular form. I almost never see anyone using it, and that's because it's just blatantly weak. Let's check out its spells. Obfuscate's a 0 pip mantle that gives you a pip if your opponent's shielded. I'm not the biggest fan of mantles, but hey, at least it has a useful condition, unlike Fire Minotaur or Fire Colossus is. Not a bad way to benefit from your opponent shielding. Vicious Insult's just a standard 0 pip 2 round taunt. It's honestly Fire Cyclops' best spell, and you should try to use it immediately at the start of a fight if possible to keep your teammates alive. Without the ability to taunt, Fire Cyclops would be so much worse. Temper donates a pip for a pip, and clears a damage over time for a 75 heal over time. Donating a pip to an ally isn't bad at all, especially because Fire Cyclops' own spells stink anyway, so your teammates are better off with your pips than you are. And hey, this is so much better than Fire Minnow, a medium-sized form's damage over time clearing spell. Blood Boil is the hit you'll be relying on most, and it's not even that good. It's just a 2 pip 150 hit that detonates a damage over time if you have a heal over time. It's a pretty awful condition. but hey, at least the damage from this spell isn't over time like all your other single target hits. Flashpoint is a 2-pip 150 damage over time that'll deal an additional 100 damage if your team has a minion up. Of course you can't summon minions on your own, so don't expect to ever pull this condition off. So yeah, this spell just costs 2 pips to deal 50 damage 3 rounds in a row. That's god awful. Up in Smoke is atrocious, considering it's a 3-pip AoE mantle. The only upside is that you'll get a pip back for every opponent that's shielded, but don't expect to pull this condition off often. Discard this every time. Flame On is your 4-pip 225 AoE hit, which is incredible, but it puts a 300 damage over time on yourself. So you're basically sacrificing yourself by using this, but honestly, it's still so much better damage per pip than all your other spells, so prioritize using it. In fact, the perfect strat is just taunting on round 1, and then once you get 4 pips, drop this massive AoE hit on your opponents. Unfortunately, prior to KI's Spring 2022 balance patch, this spell actually dealt 300 AoE damage instead, which was downright broken, so compared to that, it's not as good. But hey, still not bad at all. Broiler's a 4-pip 375 damage over time. For a damage over time, this value isn't worth 4 pips. You're better off using Flame On instead. Turbocharge is an awful 5-pip friendly AoE spell that gives 2 pips to everyone on your team and clears anyone's damage over time for a 125 heal over time. Hey, at least it's better than Mithrat's AoE pip donation. Fulmination is a 6-pip 300 AoE damage over time that deals an additional 150 AoE damage if your team has a minion up. Hey, if you can find yourself a teammate that summons a minion to pull off this condition, then by all means, it's a great hit. But without the condition, it's trash. Again, just stick to Flame On instead. Overall, Fire Cyclops is an incredibly weak form that's truly horrible at dishing out damage. The fact that your best single hit is just a 2-pip 150 says a lot. So your main strat should just be taunting on round 1, then mantling into a Flame On. This'll definitely leave you dead by the end of your turn, but at least you're going out with a bang. Unfortunately, you have so much trash in your deck, you'd be lucky to even pull the right cards when needed. And I'm not sure why 2 of your spells have a friendly minion condition when you can't even cast a minion yourself. So yeah, the spells on this form are just horrendous. I'm gonna go ahead and place Fire Cyclops all the way at the bottom in F tier. Players often underestimate how insanely powerful Balance Wolf can be, because it's a balance form. But don't let its school deceive you. Balance Wolf's the only large form in the game with 100 damage per pip on all of its hits, making it quite the powerhouse. Combine that with its massive 575 HP, and you truly become a force to be reckoned with. The only problem is that you can't dish out more than 200 damage at a time, and aside from charm manipulation, you don't have much other utility. Anyway, let's check out its spells. For 0 pips, Lousy Thief swaps any charm with the opponent, then deals 50 damage. With swap conditions, you always need to play smart. If you're not careful, you can easily push a blade or steal a weakness. But if you know what you're doing, then stealing a blade or pushing a weakness can be extremely beneficial, and you'll rely a lot on this for building pips too because it's your only 0-pip spell. Scuttling Scorpion deals 100 damage for 1 pip, and clears a shield for a 50 trap. It would be better if the shield clear happened before the 100 damage, but hey, it's still 100 damage per pip, which is amazing for a large form. Sudden Flare is another one of Balance Wolf's spells that also deals 100 damage for a pip. And it'll give you back a pip if the opponent has a blade or weakness, so the condition will pay for itself. That's pretty great. For 2 pips, Double Down swaps a charm with an ally, then gives 2 pips. 2 pips for 2 pips is alright, nothing too special. Imperil is great. It's a 2-pip spell that casts a 100 trap on the opponent, and a protected 100 blade on yourself. That's 200 value for 2 pips, which again is really solid, especially for a large form like Balance Wolf. And the best part is, you can safely follow this up with a Lousy Thief the following turn without worrying about losing your blade because it's protected. Hunting Howl stinks. It's a 2-pip 4-round 50 blade aura. The only scenario where casting this would be worth it is if you hit every single round during the next 4 rounds. This would get 200 value from the aura, making it worthwhile. But in most cases, you won't be spamming hits every single round, so you're better off just not wasting 2 pips on this. Discard it every time. Incitement costs 3 pips to give 3 pips and clears any charm for a 100 blade. I don't love how Balance Wolf gets so many large pip donations because your high pip cost spells are all very good, so you wouldn't want to get rid of your pips. Also, make sure to never cast this on an ally with a blade or it'll remove it. Stalking Smilodon is a 3-pip 200 hit that gives you back a pip, so you could think of this as a literal 2-pip 200, which is insanely good for a large form, except you can only cast it once you have 3 or more pips. Still, this value is ridiculously good. Vengeful Ronin is an amazing 4-pip 200 AoE hit. I'm surprised this AoE damage is so high for a large form. Compare this to Balance Rat, a small form's AoE hit, and you'll see what I mean. They're not even close. You should definitely bust out this AoE hit whenever possible. Lastly, Scouring Sand costs 5 pips for a 100 trap on all opponents, and a protected 150 blade on everyone on your team. The value once again is excellent, except it's not often you'll find yourself at 5 pips because you're much better off casting Vengeful Ronin at 4. Overall, Balance Wolf is a strong hitter with an incredibly high amount of health. It doesn't get taken down easily, allowing you time to rack up low-cost hits for a ton of damage, and it punishes blades and weaknesses extremely well with its 0-pip charm swap. There isn't really a main strat you need to use, as long as you bust out as many hits as you can. I prefer casting Imperil on round 1, and then spamming 1-pip 100s every round after. Trust me, the damage adds up real quick. Also, don't forget you have a great 4-pip AoE hit too. I'd avoid donating pips, and make sure to discard your Aura and Sandstorm whenever they show up in your hand. Overall, I'd place Balance Wolf in B tier. Ice Drake's known for stalling out its opponents in slow-paced fights, with some of the best shield spamming in the game, mainly due to its minion. Let's check out its spells. Spiteful Resolve is a 0-pip 50 hit that gives you a 75 shield if the opponent has a weakness. You may be thinking, what good is a weakness condition on a form like Ice Drake? Well, Ice Drake's minion can actually cast weaknesses, so this spell is great for comboing off of those. For 0 pips, Take Cover casts a 75 shield or 2 75 shields if you have a minion up, and it's pretty often that your minion will be up, so you'll be getting 150 value for 0 pips, which is insane. Press Advantage is normally a 1-pip 75 trap, but if the opponent's bladed, it'll clear it for a 125 trap instead. Not bad at all. Cutting Wit is a 1-pip 75 hit that taunts you for 2 rounds. Taunting as an ice form is incredibly useful. You should cast this as early as you can in a fight to protect your teammates. Call Dragon Thrall is your minion summoning card. Interestingly, this is the only 1-pip minion summon in the game, whereas every other form's minion costs 0 pips. The minion you summon is a Fishy Thrall, a 150 HP minion that casts 1 of 3 spells every single round. Either a 1-pip 50 shield, a 1-pip AoE stun block, or a 1-pip 50 weakness. These are all excellent spells for a minion, making this one of the best minions in the game, and as I mentioned earlier, you can combo nicely off these weaknesses. Definitely summon this minion whenever you can. Dragon Skin is a 2-pip 100 shield that casts an AoE stun block as well. Note that the 100 shield is a single shield though, and not an AoE. I'm not a huge fan of this spell, it's only useful against forms that stun. Cold Shoulder is a 2-pip 150 hit that throws on an additional 50 weakness if you're taunted. That's pretty great value if you use this right after taunting. Icy Rage is your strongest hit, dealing 225 damage for 3 pips. The best part is, if you have a weakness, it'll clear it for a 75 weakness on the opponent before you deal the 225 damage, making this such an amazing counter to weaknesses. Dragon Armor is a 4-pip 200 AoE shield that'll cast an additional 100 AoE shield if you have a minion up. That's a great amount of value, especially if your minion's up. It's a good way to keep your teammates alive. Warcry isn't good at all. It's a weak 5-pip 200 AoE hit that'll taunt you for 2 rounds. Taunting is really only good at low pip costs, since you want to be able to plan exactly when to use it. Having it as part of a 5-pip AoE spell is just unnecessary. Overall, Ice Drake's not terrible, but not too great either. It is really good at shield spamming though, especially when your minion is up. For that reason, I recommend taunting on round 1 to keep your teammates alive, then summoning your minion on round 2. After that, just spam take cover to rack up insane shield value as you build up pips for either an Icy Rage or an AoE shield. A good thing about Ice Drake is that it's the best stun blocker in the game, so it's a solid counter to some of the deadlier storm forms. Overall, I'd place Ice Drake in C tier. Deathpig used to be one of the 3 medium-sized forms that starts a fight with 3 pips, making it truly overpowered. However, during the Spring 2022 balance patch, KI reduced its bonus pips from 2 to 1, making it start fights with only 2 pips now. Still, Deathpig's a phenomenal form. It has access to amazing weaknesses, drains, and 2 pip 200 hits. What more can you ask for? Well, maybe a better way to build pips. Only having 1 0-pip spell isn't great. Anyways, let's check out its spells. Stenchbug is Deathpig's only 0-pip spell, casting a simple 75 damage over time. It's basically just a Beastmoon burn treasure card that does death damage instead of fire. It's not that great, but you'll need to rely on it a lot for building pips. Atrophy's a 1-pip 100 weakness that clears a heal over time for a 75 damage over time. Don't expect to pull this condition off often, but that shouldn't matter because the 100 weakness alone is excellent for a medium-sized form. Red Death is just a 1-pip 100 trap. Not bad. Siphon Strength is a 2-pip 200 weakness that clears a blade for a 2-round double pip aura. So if the opponent's bladed, you literally get your 2 pips back, which means this basically becomes a 0-pip 200 weakness. That's wild, and even without the condition, a 2-pip 200 weakness is still very good. You can really ruin an opponent's day with this if they're trying to AoE. Maiden of Pain is an amazing 2-pip 200 hit that clears a heal over time for a 100 trap. Again, you won't pull this condition off often, but that's okay because a 2-pip 200 is always awesome. Keep in mind that back in the day when Deathpig started with 3 pips, you could literally spam these 2-pip 200s on round 1 and 2. This was completely broken, and most likely the reason KI took away one of its bonus pips. Festering Wound is a 2-pip 200 damage over time that also slaps on a 75 heal trap. This spell stinks. It's only useful against life forms, but otherwise just discard it. Moongloam Wraith is a phenomenal 3-pip 150 drain. That's 300 value for 3 pips if you get all the health from it. It's an amazing way to keep yourself alive while dealing solid damage. And don't forget your trap value doubles when using it. Befouling Brew is a hefty 4-pip 500 damage over time that throws on a Dispel if you're shielded. So if you pair yourself with an ice form, this extra Dispel is pretty nice. But still, even with the condition, it's not worth 4 pips. You're better off just discarding this and focusing on your 2-pip 200s and 3-pip drains instead. Putrescent Wound is a horrendous 5-pip 250 AoE damage over time, as well as a 75 AoE heal trap. It's never a good idea to cast this. Discard it every time. Unhallowed Aid is tremendous. It's a 5-pip 250 AoE hit that casts a 100 AoE blade if you have a blade yourself. So if a teammate blades you before using this, you get some ridiculously high value for 5 pips. And even without the condition, the AoE damage is still worth casting. Problem is, as Deathpig you'll most likely never be at 5 pips, so just discard this. Overall, Deathpig is a jack of all trades. It can hit, trap, drain, and weaken very well. Its one glaring issue is that it stinks at building pips, due to having only 1 0-pip spell. Your best bet is busting out your 2-pip 200 on round 1, then Stenchbug until you can 200 again, or Stenchbug again into a drain. And never be afraid to drop a fat weakness on your opponent, they'll never see it coming. I'd put Deathpig in A tier. Ice Fairy's a truly awful form. It's sneaky with its pacify, and its shield value isn't too bad, but it's the single worst hitter in the entire game. And that's not just because of its horrendous damage per pip, but because it literally only has 4 hits in its deck. 250 hits, a 150 hit, and a 150 AoE hit. If you end up alone in a fight as Ice Fairy, then expect to run out of cards because you simply won't have enough hits to knock out your opponents. That's the sad truth. But anyway, let's check out its spells. Chill Wind is a 0 pip 50 hit that gives you back a pip if the opponent has a damage over time. That's an awful condition because obviously you can't cast damage over times yourself, and 50 damage for 0 pips isn't good on a small form. Placate is a 0 pip 2-round pacify. The card description is glitched here. It says self only, but you can cast this on anyone. Still though, you really only ever need to cast this on yourself because the opponents target you first. I recommend casting this on round 1 to keep yourself alive. It works way better than a shield. Ice Scream is a 1 pip 50 hit that clears a blade for a stun. I have no idea why the damage per pip is so ridiculously low on the spell. This is on par with Ice Wolf's 1 pip hit, which says a lot. Normally I'd say discard this, but honestly, you can't afford to discard any hits, since you barely have any. Freeze and Thaw is a 1 pip 125 shield that clears a trap for a pip. That's pretty good value, and an excellent condition. Glacial Dampener is a 1 pip 125 shield and stun block. Again, great shield value, and stun blocks are always useful. Trap Beetle is a 2 pip 150 hit that throws on a 125 trap if you have a minion up. Since you can't cast minions yourself, never expect to pull this condition off. A 2 pip 150 hit on a small form is pretty bad, but again, it's literally your strongest hit, so you need to rely on this often for damage. Winter's Blessing gives 3 pips for 3 pips, and casts a 125 shield if you have a minion up. Again, don't expect to pull this condition off, but yeah, Ice Fairy's so useless, it's not a bad idea to give your 3 pips to literally anyone else. Permafrost Shield costs 4 pips to cast a 375 shield and give a pip. This is some real good shield value, and a solid way to keep you or a teammate alive. Just make sure your opponents won't be able to clear it. Briskin Reward gives 2 pips to everyone on your team for 4 pips, and it'll give a 125 shield to everyone on your team if you have a minion up. Again, this condition most likely will never happen, so it's really just a 2 pip AoE donation for 4 pips. Not bad. Frozen Warrior used to deal 300 AoE damage for 5 pips, and clear a trap on everyone on your team for a 125 shield. This was completely broken, since you could just pacify on round 1, then safely pop this whopping 300 AoE damage off by round 3. However, during the Spring 2022 balance patch, KI cut this AoE damage in half, from 300 all the way down to 150. So now, it's one of the worst AoE hits in the game, and absolutely not worth 5 pips. Problem is, you barely have any hits in your deck, so you need to keep this around for emergencies. Overall, Ice Fairy's the single worst hitter in the entire game. Even Ice Wolf can hit way better, which says a lot. And again, it's not just Ice Fairy's damage per pip that stinks, but it's the fact that you quite literally only have 4 damage spells, and 2 of them are so weak they hardly do anything, while one of them costs too many pips to sufficiently cast, so you're literally stuck with just your beetles for damage. I can't even begin to explain how much of a mess that is. Fortunately, you have access to pacifies and decent shields, as well as pip donations, so hopefully you can support your teammates well enough for them to win the fight for you. But yeah, it doesn't get much worse than this. Ice Fairy belongs in F tier. Fire Minnow's a pretty boring form. It's awful at building pips, it has some pretty atrocious spells, and it's the worst fire form at countering shields. But on the bright side, it does have access to 2 2-pip 200s, and that's really all you need in a fast-paced game like Beastmoon. Let's check out its spells. Red Eye is Fire Minnow's 0-pip spell. It's a mantle. Yeah. This means that Fire Minnow relies solely on mantles for building pips, meaning most of your fights depend heavily on RNG. Is this a good thing? Maybe. Cauterize is probably the worst spell in the entire game. I'm embarrassed just reading this card description out loud, but here goes. For 1 pip, you clear a damage over time and cast a measly 50 heal over time. This spell may not even be worth 0 pips. I mean, a 50 heal over time? And often you won't have a damage over time to clear, so this is literally just a 1 pip 50 heal over time. Could someone explain to me why this would ever be worth it? Please discard this every single time. I wouldn't even use this to clear damage over time. You're better off keeping that pip. This is downright ridiculous. Smoldering Cat is a 1 pip 150 hit. Pretty standard. Not good, but not bad. Noxious Golem is the first of your 2 pip 200 hits. It's a 2 pip 200 that throws on an additional 200 damage over time if your opponent has a shield. That's honestly amazing value if you pull this condition off, and even without the condition, a 2 pip 200 is always great. Your second 2 pip 200 is Blazing Construct, except this time the condition puts a mantle on your opponent if you have a trap on yourself. This is clearly a much worse condition that won't even get pulled off frequently, but hey, it's still a 2 pip 200. That's awesome. Smogbats is awful. It's a 2 pip 150 damage over time that also throws on a mantle. I didn't know damage over time value could get this low. Discard this every time, unless your opponent is an ice form. Ruby Shark's not too bad. It's a 3 pip 375 damage over time. That's 125 per tick. Not bad if you're at 3 pips. Bargain of Brass is weird. It deals a whopping 250 damage to yourself, which most likely will kill you, and then a 300 AoE damage over time. It's like the reverse of Fire Cyclops' AoE, dealing damage over time to the enemies instead of yourself, and direct damage to yourself instead of the enemies. This is clearly way worse, because at least you could survive a little if the damage to yourself is over time. So yeah, I guess if you're at 3 pips and you're about to die anyway, you may as well go down with a bang. But usually this is not worth it at all, and you're better off using anything else to stay alive. Bombardier Beetle is a 4 pip 200 AoE hit that detonates if the opponent's stunned. This is probably the worst condition in the game. How on earth can you time a hit exactly when an opponent's stunned? It's not even a good conditional reward anyway, so don't bother. But yeah, 200 AoE damage for 4 pips is pretty solid, so honestly it's not a bad card to keep in your hand. Problem is, it's tough to build the pips for it. Infernal Construct is a 5 pip 250 AoE hit that casts an additional 200 damage over time on any shielded opponents. The value's pretty solid on this, and the condition isn't so bad, but good luck ever making it to 5 pips as a Fire Minnow. Just discard this, because you won't ever be able to use it. Overall, like a lot of the minnows, Fire Minnow struggles to build pips, relying solely on its 0 pip mantles, so often you won't ever be able to use more than 2 pips. But that's okay, because that's all you need to dish out your 2 pip 200s. Your best strat is just a 200 on round 1, then mantle, then 200 again, then mantle again, and so on and so forth. Don't expect to have enough pips to AoE, and by all means, never, ever use Cauterize. It's also pretty pathetic that Fire Minnow can't even clear a single shield as a fire form. I'd throw Fire Minnow in C tier. Deathcroc's all about hurting itself to dish out extra value. Its mechanic works similarly to Feint from main game, or honestly more like Immolate. Deathcroc's the only death form in the game that can revive teammates, making it super useful in combat. Combine that with its AoE drain, and its 2 pip 200, and its 2 pip 250, and you have an incredible form. Let's check out its spells. Troll's Trade is a 0 pip 75 damage over time that steals a heal over time. Pretty weak damage and a useless condition. Dangerous Deal is Deathcroc's signature heal. For 0 pips, you deal 50 damage to yourself for a 100 heal. Just the fact that you can revive a teammate, giving them a decent chunk of health for no pips at all, is amazing. And even if used on yourself, it's a net 50 heal, which is the same as casting a Self Blessing. Amazing utility and great value. Stanchion costs 1 pip to cast a 75 weakness on the opponent, and a stun block on yourself. This is especially great against storm forms, and honestly not too bad against anything else. For 1 pip, Drops of Death deals 75 self-damage to cast a 200 damage over time on the opponent. For a medium-sized form, a 1 pip 200 damage over time isn't bad at all, but I'd say it's not worth the damage to yourself. Discard this spell. Pound of Flesh is wild. For 2 pips, you deal 125 damage to yourself, which is a ton, but then dish out 250 damage to your opponent, which is also a ton. That's a net value of 125 for 2 pips, which isn't great. The self-damage is very noticeable here. Say you use this on round 1. This already puts you at 325 HP, even before the opponents get a chance to hit. So you gotta be very smart with this, or you'll get yourself killed. You should really only use this if you're on the verge of death, and your opponents are gonna kill you anyway, so you go out with a bang. Otherwise, stick to your 2 pip 200. And that 2 pip 200 is Buccaneer's Raid. For 2 pips, you deal 200 damage and clear a blade for a 100 infection. That's amazing damage per pip, with a pretty good condition too. Make sure you stock up on battle cards for this. It's your best single hit. Memphitis is a 3 pip afterlife you cast on an ally, such that once they die, it triggers a 200 AoE trap. The value here is great, but it's a little hard to time afterlives like this, so use this sparingly. Pumpkin's Plunder is amazing. It's a 3 pip 75 AoE drain, which may seem weak, but keep in mind the value is doubled since you get health back. So if you use this in a 2v2, you're dishing out 150 damage in total, and getting back 150 health. That's 300 value for 3 pips, which is already high, but the value only gets higher in a 3v3 or 4v4. It's also not a bad option when opponents have minions out, since you'll get extra health back. Hurtful Heal is the AoE version of Dangerous Deal. For 4 pips, you deal 250 damage to yourself for a 150 AoE heal. Keep in mind, since you yourself get 150 health back, you're really only damaging yourself for 100, not 250. Still though, that's a lot of self-damage, and this spell's pretty expensive to cast, so it's not always worth it. You'll usually be targeted first by the opponents too, so an AoE heal isn't necessary. But the good news is, if you do pull this off, everyone on your team is guaranteed to be at least alive with 150 HP afterwards, which is solid. Lastly, Rodent's Ripoff is a 5 pip 300 AoE damage over time that steals a heal over time from each enemy. The damage isn't great, and the condition isn't useful. Since you'll be down a lot of health as you build pips anyway, you're better off relying on Pumpkin's Plunder as your main AoE hit instead. Overall, Deathcroc plays dirty, literally hurting itself to dish out crazy value in its heals and hits. But in most cases, the self-damage just isn't worth it. I mean, you start the fight already at only 450 HP, so all the self-hits start to add up quick. Don't be too greedy with such high damage per pip on Pound of Flesh. You should really only whip it out in cases where you'll exactly kill the opponent, or where you're around 25 HP left and you just die from the opponents anyway. Otherwise, rely on your 2 pip 200 instead. It's much safer and still packs a punch. Dangerous Deal is such a good heal to bust out whenever needed, but for that reason, your opponents will usually take you out first, so be careful. Anyway, as a medium-sized form with solid revives, 2 pip 200s, and a cheap AoE drain, Deathcroc is extremely versatile and definitely a threat. I'm putting it right in A tier where it belongs. Balance Minnow is the king of heal over times. Normally, heal over times are awful in such a fast-paced game like Beastmoon, but Balance Minnow actually pulls this mechanic off pretty well, considering how bulky it is. If left in a 1v1, Balance Minnow easily outpaces its opponents by recovering tons of health over time as it dishes out damage. It also gets access to 7 different minions, with a unique mechanic I'll explain in a bit. Combine that with its bulky 475 HP and 2 pip 200, and you've got a pretty solid form. Let's check out its spells. Call Witness is one of the most interesting spells in the game. It costs 0 pips to summon one of 7 minions, based on the school of the target you select. So if your opponent's a life form, you'll get a life minion. If your opponent's a storm form, you'll get a storm minion, and so on and so forth. Each of the minions repeats the same 0 pip spell 4 turns in a row, then once they reach 5 pips, they just die. So they really don't do much at all, considering how low the value of their spells is, and how they straight up die on turn 5. To be honest, I don't really understand their purpose, because usually if the minion itself is weak, their caster at least has minion conditions to pull off. But Balance Minnow only has one spell that benefits from a minion, and even one that expels a minion. If these minions didn't have that strange sacrifice spell, they'd be at least a little decent, but as they are right now, they're pretty useless. The concept is cool though, and they only cost 0 pips to summon, so at least you could build a pip summoning them. Pariah's Curse is a 0 pip spell that deals 50 damage and expels all minions on both sides. So it just wipes out any minion on the playing field, which is good for killing the opponent's minions, but remember that you cast your own minion too. It's pretty strange that Balance Minnow only has 2 0 pip spells for pip building, such that one summons a minion while the other expels it. So just be careful to avoid casting this directly after summoning one, if you want it to survive. For 1 pip, Righteous Strength casts a protected 200 heal over time, and clears any overtime for a pip. This spell's actually pretty useful, and you can often treat it like a single pip donation, since Balance Minnow casts so many protected heal over times. So after you cast this once on your ally, you can cast it again to remove the protection from the first one, and give them a pip. That's pretty great value for just 1 pip. It's still a heal over time though, which isn't the greatest. Balance Minnow also gets another 1 pip heal over time, but this one's worse. It only gives a protected 75 heal over time, along with a 50 blade. The heal over time is so low in value, it's practically useless, and the 50 blade is just too low to justify wasting a pip. Again, you can follow this up with Righteous Strength though for a free pip. Reconciliation gives 2 pips to your ally for 2 pips, and it swaps any overtime with them. Not bad. Overruled is Balance Minnow's 2 pip 200 hit, and it swaps any overtime with the opponent. This spell alone brings Balance Minnow up a few tiers. It's amazing to whip out on round 1, so you should definitely stock up on battle cards for this. Sanction is a 2 pip 100 hit that also puts a protected 200 heal over time on yourself. Not the best offensive wise, but 300 value for 2 pips every time isn't that bad. It's a good spell to use when you're around half health. Embolden donates 3 pips for 3 pips, and gives yourself an extra pip if any side has a minion up. It's your only beneficial minion condition, and not a bad idea to cast after summoning one. Just Cause is a 4 pip protected 125 AoE heal over time, and 100 AoE blade. The heal over time is especially awful from this, so you should really just think of this as a 4 pip 100 AoE blade, which is garbage. Discard this every time. Lastly, Sweeping Sanction is a 5 pip 200 AoE hit and protected 100 AoE heal over time. This is a slightly better AoE spell because at least it does some damage, but it's still not great and costs so many pips. Stick to your single hits. Overall, Balance Minnow is pretty well rounded. Obviously you should prioritize your 2 pip 200 hits, stock up on these and dish them out whenever you can. Careful not to steal any damage over times or push any heal over times with them though. Your minion, or 7 minions, are the worst in the game, dishing out extremely low value, and then straight up dying. The fact that Balance Minnow has 475 HP makes it decently bulky though, and in a slow-paced fight, it does a wonderful job sustaining itself and its teammates. I throw Balance Minnow right in C tier. Death Elf's one of the most recent forms added to Beastmoon. It has some high damage per pip spells as well as an extremely good 2 pip drain and plenty of blades, except unlike most small forms, Death Elf only has 1 bonus pip, meaning it starts fights with only 2 pips. So while Mithrat and Storm Elf can spam 2 250s in a row at the start of a fight, making them brutally overpowered, Death Elf can only dish out 1 250. I honestly find this pretty balanced, yet underpowered compared to the strongest forms. Anyway, let's take a look. Deathly Toll is a 0 pip 125 hit that also stuns yourself. It's the only self-stunning spell in the entire game. Of course 125 damage for 0 pips is excellent, but as a small form, you can't really afford to stun yourself and give up the following turn, since you'll be targeted and killed so fast. In other words, if you cast this on round 1, good luck making it to round 3 to cast another spell. Unless you're paired with an ice form that stun blocks you, I'd discard this. Heal Steel Blade costs 0 pips to remove a heal over time from your opponent and give yourself a 50 blade. For a small form, 50 value for 0 pips is terrible, and it's even worse that you can't give this blade to an ally. And I know I'm kinda ranting here, but I'm not sure why this spell's called Heal Steel Blade, since you're clearing a heal over time and not stealing it. But anyway, this is your better 0 pip option for building pips, because at least it doesn't stun you. Death's Embrace is a 1 pip 100 weakness that clears a heal over time for another 75 weakness. 100 value for 1 pip as a small form isn't the best, and heal over time conditions are never too useful, but in general, this isn't too bad of a spell. For 1 pip, Parry Blade either gives a 100 blade or a 150 blade if you're shielded. So again, if paired with an ice form, it's definitely worth casting, but on its own, a 100 blade for 1 pip is pretty bad for a small form, especially because literal medium-sized forms like Stormcroc and Stormpig get a 1 pip 125 blade. So far, Death Elf spells just are not up to par. Carrion Scream is Death Elf's first actually good spell. It's a 1 pip 125 hit that gives you a 50 blade if the target has a heal over time. Excellent value. But I do find it odd that we only covered half of Death Elf spells so far, and this is the third with a heal over time based condition. There really isn't too much variety condition wise so far. Touch of Unlife is excellent. It's a 2 pip 150 drain that clears a blade for a 100 weakness. Without the condition, that's already 300 value for 2 pips if you get all the health back from the drain. Amazing. And the condition's fantastic too. Blades are very common in Beastmoon, so clearing one for a 100 weakness is an incredible punishment. If you think you'll be taking damage on round 1, this is a solid first turn cast to keep yourself alive a little longer. Your best spell though is Feline Fatale. It's a whopping 2 pip 250 hit, on par with Mithrat and Stormelf damage, that also steals a blade. Again, insane value with an amazing condition. If you don't need to cast Touch of Unlife on round 1 because you're not gonna die, then definitely cast this instead. It's great at knocking out an opponent immediately. Death Breath is a 3 pip 150 AoE hit that also throws a 100 blade on yourself if you're shielded. Its damage per pip isn't the greatest for a small form, and you can't cast this on round 1 because you're one of the only small forms in the game that starts with only 2 pips, and the condition only works if you're paired with an ice form that shields you. But hey, you can always 50 blade yourself on round 1, and then cast this on round 2 for some decent AoE damage. I'd stick to your single hits though. Deadly Weapons is a 4 pip 200 AoE blade that also casts a 150 AoE shield if you're already shielded. If paired with an ice form that shields you, that's a whopping 350 AoE value for 4 pips, which is insanely good. But most often, it's just okay. You'll hardly ever be at 4 pips as Death Elf though, so you're better off discarding it. Lastly, Eldritch Hex is a 5 pip 200 AoE drain that clears a blade on each opponent for a 100 weakness. That's really good value. Let me be blunt though, you'll never be at 5 pips as Death Elf. If you are for some reason, definitely cast this. It'll deal great damage and bring you back to full health. But sadly, because of its high pip cost, you'll have to discard this every single time. Overall, Death Elf is a mixed bag. It has some really good spells and some pretty bad spells. The problem is, even if you discard your bad spells and get lucky pulling your good ones, you only start a fight with 2 pips, contrary to most other small forms that start with 3, so you can't spam high damage like other forms. On a positive note, Death Elf synergizes extremely well with ice forms. For instance, if an Ice Croc 0 pip shields you, you're safe to drop a Deathly Toll without stunning yourself, or get some extra value out of your shield conditions. I honestly find Death Elf to be pretty balanced, and I like to see KI design future small forms in a similar manner. But you didn't come here for a design opinion, you came here for a tier. I'm placing Death Elf in B tier. Here we have our final form, Life Croc. Crazy how I randomly rolled Death Elf and Life Croc back to back as the final two forms, considering they're the two newest ones. But yeah, this one's real interesting. As you'll see, Life Croc's gimmick is giving everyone on your team heal spells, literally inserting them into you and your allies' hands. Life Croc's the only form in the game that can do this. The only other form that comes close is Death Drake, which puts bad spells in your opponent's decks. Anyway, let's check out its spells. Primal Blade's a 0-pip 50 blade that activates a heal over time. Not a terrible condition considering you have plenty of heal over times in your deck, and you have 2 blade conditionals you can follow this up with. Ankh Blade is a 1-pip 100 heal blade that clears a trap for a heal spell. The heal spell this conditional puts into your ally's hand is Healing Blessing. It's a 1-pip 100 heal. Great value and super easy to use considering it goes right into your hand and not just shuffled somewhere into your deck like Death Drake's Pixies. Anyway, without the condition, a 100 heal blade isn't too useful, but if you land the condition, you're giving your ally a literal heal to cast the following round along with this heal blade. So the very next round, they can revive someone for 200 health for just 1 pip. But that's only if your ally's trapped, which isn't often. One more thing, this heal blade counts towards your blade conditionals, so it's not a bad idea to cast on yourself for some good combos. Imp Mischief costs 1 pip to deal 75 damage, and it detonates a damage over time. It'll also deal an extra 50 damage if you're bladed. Your damage over times are pretty low in value, so detonating them isn't worth it, but the possible 125 total damage if you're bladed is excellent. In most cases though, it's just a 1-pip 75 hit, which is just okay. Bantam Strike's a 2-pip 150 hit that puts a 150 heal over time on yourself if you're bladed. The condition's very easy to pull off since you have so many blade options, meaning you can easily get 300 value for just 2 pips. Still though, the damage isn't the greatest. Rejuvenate's a 2-pip 300 heal over time that clears a trap for a 100 heal blade. Heal over times aren't too useful, and the condition's hard to pull off. Gift of Life is your signature spell, costing 2 pips to insert a heal spell into everyone on your team's hand. It's the same 1-pip 100 heal as before, so yeah, allowing everyone on your team to become a healer is really useful, but while this gimmick works incredibly well in slower paced fights, it's just too slow to work well in the competitive meta, because reviving someone first requires using 2 pips to give out the heals, and then using 1 pip to cast the heal. That's a 2-round strat that uses all your pips and only revives someone for 100 HP, and you're not dealing any damage that whole time either. But hey, if you're up against slow tanks that won't kill you anytime soon, then it's not a bad strategy to set up. Life Cycle is horrendous. For 2 pips, you cast a 100 damage over time on the opponent and a 150 heal over time on yourself. But if the opponent has a minion out, then it'll drop a 300 heal over time on yourself instead. As always, heal overtimes aren't too useful, and the damage on the spell is just atrocious. 2 pips to throw a 4-round damage overtime on the opponent that deals 25 damage per tick? No thanks. Cat Attack's surprisingly solid. Normally it's a 3-pip 225 hit, but if you have a damage overtime on yourself, it'll clear it and deal a whopping 300 damage instead. This is your best hit, and it's a phenomenal way to punish anyone dumb enough to cast a damage over time on you. Light of Life is a 4-pip 200 AoE heal blade that clears a trap on anyone on your team for a heal spell. Again, this condition inserts a 1-pip 100 heal right into their hand, giving them immediate access to revive an ally. And with this heal blade, they'll be reviving for 300 HP, which is crazy. But yeah, in most cases, you won't pull this condition off, so you're just giving everyone a 200 heal blade, which they won't end up using. Super pointless. Lastly, Dance of Destiny's a 5-pip 200 AoE damage over time, and it puts a 150 heal over time on everyone on your team. If the opponent has a minion out, the AoE heal over time values 300 per person instead. This is just a painfully slow spell, dealing such little damage for 5 pips, and the heal over times aren't useful. You should really stick to your single hits instead. Overall, Life Croc's a strange form. It's the only life form in the game that can't instantly revive someone, because it first requires you to spend pips to give out heal spells before using them. Not great in a fast-paced fight, but if you have time on your side, then this strategy works wonders, since everyone on your team can then heal anyone. But yeah, heal blades, weak hits, and heal over time spells clutter your deck immensely, making it practically impossible to be useful at all. I'd throw Life Croc all the way down in E tier. Wait, there's one more super secret form I forgot to cover, and that is subscribe to Gladrocker. In all seriousness, this video took months of effort to make, so it would mean a lot if you showed your support by subscribing. Oh shoot, I forgot to answer my friend. It's only been a few months, I'm sure they won't mind. But yeah, I'd say there really isn't a best form in Beastmoon. They're all winners. Nah, just kidding, it's definitely Stormelf, that form's disgustingly broken. But yeah, here's the complete Beastmoon Hunt tier list. Looks a little better than my Mayhem one, don't you think? Let me know in the comments which of these 48 forms tiers you agree with, and which ones you don't agree with. I'm super curious to read all your feedback. Oh, and don't forget I rated 480 spells in this video too, so don't be afraid to let me know what you think of those as well. Anyway, if you like this video, you'll probably enjoy my Wizard101 Iceberg Explained video, where I discover facts, mysteries, and conspiracies about the game. Or, if you want to hear me talk about Beastmoon more, then check out my Hunt and Mayhem guide. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this experience, and as always, I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace.